You know, so.
Boundary, 1, 2, 3. Boundary middle, 1, 2, 3.
No one votes me. I'll walk it out.
Boundary 3, 1, 2.
All right, I am calling this workshop to order. So today we are here to talk about two things. One is LD 2003. The council has a lot of amendments that are being requested today for zoning as a result of the state legislation. And there's also been a lot of conversation in the ordinance committee on this, but I figured for the rest of the council and the public, just for Autumn to come and kind of share again at a higher level, the changes that are going to be discussed later today, just to kind of set the stage a little bit so that we have a little bit more context and make sure the full council fully understands the details. And then again, for the public education as well. And then after that, we'll jump into the GMO. So we have some material prepared that's really more conversation starters to get us to revisit the current GMO and some potential changes, I think, that we've heard from either the counselors or the public that need to be discussed, so that those can be put forward as potential amendments for second reading on our June 21st meeting. So with that being said, I'm just going to pass it over to Autumn and see if Autumn, I think, do I need to pull up her slides too, Tom?
Yes, if you don't mind, they should be right in the meeting packet.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Autumn, if you just want to set the stage while I pull it up.
So thank you. LD 2003 was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor last April. And it has several parts to it. And what I'll go through tonight are the different parts and how our ordinance changes are proposed to meet those. The law went into effect last July. However, the requirements don't take place until July 1 of this year. There have been several bills proposed to postpone that. However, to date, I do not believe any of them have been successful. So right now, we're still operating that it will go into effect July 1st. The rulemaking is complete, and I put that in your packet, and a copy of the actual LD 2003 law itself is at the back of your packet behind the ordinances. So I think, as I mentioned, there's 3 goals that the bill addresses, and it requires municipalities to allow additional units on lots zoned for single-family homes. It requires municipalities to allow at least 1 accessory dwelling unit where a single-family home is permitted. And then in some specific areas, it allows up to 2.5 times the density for residences designated as affordable, or the majority of those. Perfect. And so now we're on slide 2.
We got this one.
Next one. And so we can continue on. So these are the goals that I just went over. And then the next slide talks about what municipalities can do. So there are some things that you can do, and these are also in your packet and on the memo are some assumptions that we made when going through these ordinance changes. But while the law is very grand in its ideas, there are some specific things that you can do as a community to accommodate your own town's needs. So we can enact lot size minimums per units. We can define the maximum number of accessory dwelling units. We can regulate short-term rentals. And then we can also designate where our growth areas are and how those are affected. The next one, and I won't go through all of it, it's in your packet. These are some ideas and from DECD, the website. There's a lot of, they did a really good job of giving marketing information, if you will, with the law, so towns and communities could prepare for this. I know there's been a lot of conversation with planners across the state and engineers trying to figure out how this applies for their specific communities. So the next section, as I mentioned before, there's 3 sections. So section 4, section 5, and section 6. And I've highlighted those in your copy, in your packet. So section 4 is the one that deals with affordable housing in certain areas. And then section 5 deals with the single family, being able to do more than 1 home on a single family lot. And section 6 has to do with ADUs. And so as you go through this, I tried to make it really simple. And so each section is identified what the effect of the law is on the town of Scarborough, and then what is required and then those ordinance changes that are proposed for each one. The affordable housing and the ADU are fairly straightforward and simple. The single family is a little bit different. So as we go through it, feel free to ask any questions if something doesn't make sense. So the next one, again, these are the assumptions that were made, and these were presented through ordinance committee. Really tried to adhere to the most conservative approach. There's obviously some opportunities for other towns to do something different. We already have quite a bit of this built into our ordinances. So looked at it with a conservative view. We did take the opportunity to enact the lot size per unit requirements and change the ordinances accordingly to make that a rule. We also defined the maximum number of ADUs and then removed the potential for dual density bonuses where that was applicable. And so we'll get right into section 4, and that's the affordable housing density. And so there's some general requirements. The project must be approved after June 30th, 2023. It's located in a zoning district that allows multifamily in a growth area. To qualify, 80% median income for rentals, 120% of the median income for ownership, 30-year deed restrictions, and then it's a majority. So 51% of the units have to be designated as one of these two. And so what it means is if your density is 5 units per acre now, and you meet these criteria, you get 2.5 times that. So you get that additional density bonus. The parking requirements decrease. So that's one of the ones that we didn't have any ability to change that. You only are permitted 2 parking spaces per 3 units under this requirement. Your minimum lot sizes stay, water and wastewater has to be adequate, shoreland zoning, subdivision, restrictive covenants, and growth permits all still apply. So it's one of those that it's probably it's a great idea, but it might be limited in its application that we might not see very many. So the next slide talks about.
Can you take questions along the way, or are you gonna hold them?
Certainly.
again?
Certainly.
Mind if I ask a question? And you may not know the answer to this, but do we have any idea what real life examples the state used in drafting this legislation?
Honestly,
Silly question, I know, but
I think that's a good question. I do not. Counselor Katarina.
I
Probably
dealt with this
more involved.
last year on the LPC, Maine Municipal. Basically, they were looking very much at California. California's got some real big changes and, allowing more density because there's such a shortage of housing. So, yeah, and this is actually an improvement over some of the original things. So that's my answer to that at the moment. And there were other examples too, but California was a big one they were looking.
thank you.
And so the next slide talks about the effect on Scarborough. And these are the zoning districts that allow multifamily. They're all in the column, the zoning. Your maximum density is in the 3rd column down. Density factors all apply. So the affordable density bonus, and then the development transfer density bonus is shown on there, and then what LD 2003 would allow. And so that last column shows you what your density would allow 2.5 times if they meet all of the other requirements. So the only change in your packet for this one is to section 7C, residential density and affordable housing. So I've added a whole section on the housing density, and it's in your packet for this evening. It's not in the presentation. And then removed the affordable fee in lieu option for this scenario. So you can't pay a fee and get 2.5 times density. I was not able to address the density factors. So the density factors still apply. I did go through that with legal counsel to make sure, but the way the rules are written, the density factors can still apply. So we only calculate 1 bedroom as 0.5 in some districts. So those things will still be applicable. But again, this is what you would see with affordable, and the rate of growth permits still remain. Any questions on this section?
So when the legislation said that it has to be in a growth area in our comp plan, my assumption is that these zones all relate to CPD, Oak Hill and Dunstan for the most part in Haggis, or like,
Everything is essentially in a growth area for this purpose,
Mhm.
other than the rural farming and rural farming manufacturing. Because they permit multifamily.
okay, so it's really the multifamily allowance that makes it considered
Yes,
growth,
yes.
not a growth area as designated in our comp plan.
Right.
Okay.
And we do have, in some of these districts too, maybe a little too weedy, but we even have different density based on if you have sewer or not sewer. So what you've seen on this is the maximum. So if your base density, because you don't have sewer, may be lower, and then that would trickle over as well. But this is a worst case look. So the next one is section 5, and this is the one that's really written a bit, I think, cumbersome and a little harder to understand. But it's basically, any district housing is allowed. So a lot with no dwelling unit outside of the growth area, so that's rural farming and rural farming manufactured, you can have up to 2 homes if it's vacant. A lot with no dwelling inside the growth area, so all the other places, you can have up to 4. But if you already have an existing house, you can have up to 2 more, so for 3 total. So if I have a house and I have a lot and I have 1 house on it, with this rule, I can have up to 2 more. One of those can be attached, so I could add on a full house if I wanted to my house. Or I could build a barn, or I could do 1 of each. If I have 2 existing units already, no additional units are permitted. So those are so all that's sort of kind of complicated when you read it. But the thing that really applies still is the minimum lot area per unit still applies. So while I may have a home on 10,000 square feet, and I read the first part, it says I can have 2 more units. If I only have 10,000 square feet and each unit requires 10,000 square feet, I cannot, in fact, have 2 more units. And so that is the conservative approach that we've taken. So each one of your residential districts has been addressed to add those minimum lot areas per unit where applicable. So that's that part.
And then, just to remind people too, that we have the water and sewage. So if you're on a septic, you're limited by your septic as to, and perking and all of that with your lots as to what you can
Correct.
do too. So there are some limitations there also in rural areas in particular.
So yes, again, the shoreland subdivision deed restrictions, all those things still apply. So even if you had a really large lot and you had enough square footage, but you were in a deed restricted neighborhood, you wouldn't be able to do it. So all of those things still apply.
So can you help me understand, so what, is this a legislative push or is there some demand pull for this? And is there demand pull, is that coming from developers? Developers think this is a good thing, it's gonna help them with being able to build more, more units. You mentioned that it's encouraged to be in high density areas. So I'm having a hard time understanding the path for this and what the driver and the pull is, other than our good people in Augusta telling us what to do and not giving us any money for it. So can you help me with that? Do you have any ideas you're going through this? I mean, because the rush to adopt this, okay, I get that. We get a deadline, but so I still am really struggling with why.
I understand that because as a planner, I sort of I struggled with it as well, because when I read it, and that's just my background and where I come from, I'm like, okay, well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And there's these loopholes sort of built into it, if you will. So it's very well intentioned, but maybe the final version just got watered down a bit. And so it's a good, I used it as an opportunity to consolidate some of our zoning districts and to do a bit of cleanup. I think there's some potential for it to be used, especially for other communities that don't have ADUs already. We already do, and we already have a lot of density options built in. So we're really in good shape, but I think it's statewide, right? So for those communities that are smaller and that don't even allow multifamily anywhere, it's really impactful. But I think we're not feeling the impact because we're already in quite a good spot for what the purpose of it
Well,
is.
I hope that we'll have some ability to deal with revising this like we've done, fairly successfully for the most part in other areas like adopting the marijuana ordinances. We took a year and a half to do that. This is on a much tighter timeframe. But the, this all depends upon whether or not the state decides to go ahead and remove a home rule. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's just another thing that kind of lurks in the back of my mind as a factor.
Well, and I can address some of that. Maine Municipal pushed back really hard on a lot of this under the home rule authority. We got quite a few concessions. You should have seen it when it first came out. It is law now. So we do have to abide by the law unless the legislature decides to make changes. So the only thing we're waiting on now is implementation, whether they're gonna require implementation by July of this year or push it back a year. I can't tell you what's going on with that right now. I've kind of lost track of that. So it is what it is. I will tell you though that myself and some of the reps of the counselors from towns that are larger and already have zoning and whatever, you'd be amazed how much of Maine has no zoning. They have no zoning. There's no rules, there's no zoning, there's no nothing. So this was an attempt to address that. Particularly given the housing shortage that's acute throughout the state. Doesn't matter where you are in the state of Maine right now, there's an acute housing shortage. So the only thing you can do right now is lobby your representative if you'd like to see changes. But we've got to deal with what we got in front of us right now.
But simply put, the bill sponsor, the policy objective was clearly to create more housing. And the trade-off, and in my experience in working in Maine, is the first time I can think that the legislature actually did step in and in starting to erode home rule and telling us what we must do, not what we can do and decide for ourselves.
Thanks.
So the horses on the
Yeah, I guess.
Autumn, do we have many deed restricted neighborhoods and what zones are they in typically?
I honestly don't know how many, if any. I'm sure that you have some,
Yeah.
but they would be more your R2 zoning districts. I'm sure that you have some and you probably have some that have expired too over the years.
Interesting.
And those wouldn't necessarily be something one would necessarily be aware of or enforce. They kind of self-policing, if you will.
It would be more of a civil issue. My neighbor's doing this and then they would, but we would see it through a building permit too, so.
Yeah.
Some
I
opportunities.
was more just curious if people run into that, they have plans and then they find out that they live in a deed restricted neighborhood that maybe they didn't know.
Didn't read.
Yeah.
The only one that comes to mind is Cranberry Pines. It's a
Oh, yeah.
20-lot subdivision off
Really nice.
Broadturn Road, just on the other side of the turnpike. I think those are minimum by deed, 10 acre lots,
Yeah.
not to be divided.
All right.
I'm sure there are.
So the next one, there's a whole slew of amendments proposed for this section. And so the first one is a new section Z for performance standards for single family units. And so it's basically all of the things that I just went over with you, and it's part of the language in the law, and it talks about if one, then two, and so on. So it has all of those requirements. And so those are the performance standards. And then the next section is a compilation of all of the residential districts. Oh, you can go back up, sorry. So we repealed several sections. So combined RFM, RF, R2, R3, R4, and R4A into one residential category. And so added use tables and specific requirements for those, and then to try to make our zoning ordinance a little easier to understand, and then how those differ in the background while making these changes for LD 2003. So you'll see that there are minimum lot areas defined for those districts. They're all per unit. And then they all apply to the performance standards for the single family homes in those areas.
So I understand that some of our zoning areas had already been determined to be fully developed. So my guess is it's no longer true with LD 2003.
If you had enough space, correct, you could in fact expand. But you could do that now if you had enough space. So if you have 30,000 square feet now and the minimum's 10,000 square feet, you can have one residential home on it. You can subdivide today. And with LD 2003, you can subdivide the same exact way because we've rewritten the ordinance so that the minimum lot area applies per unit, per residential dwelling unit. So it's essentially the same. And then also on that one, we combined the village residential districts in the same way, just for simplicity's sake, and then added the same the uses, and then added the performance standards for single family and those as well. And so then you can go to the next one. We'll get into ADUs. And that one, so you can do one ADU anywhere you have a single family home. You do have to follow your setback requirements. No parking can be required. So that is one thing we had to change. We have a very robust ADU standards right now. And so we were able to keep the majority of those, but the parking had to be changed. We do have a maximum, we applied a maximum number for those to 1 per lot. There's a minimum size per LD 2003 of 190 square feet. So that is in there. Water and wastewater, again, all your shoreline zoning, subdivision, all of those things. The growth permits don't apply for ADUs. So that is a specific rule in LD 2003. They didn't apply before. We didn't apply them. We exempted them. We currently exempt them. And so this is the same.
So I may be jumping ahead here, but I had a question about the height requirements. So if we're allowing footprints to be much smaller, looks like the height requirements are staying the same. Is that, have we thought through the impact of that? I'm on the next slide. I'm sorry, jump ahead. I went past the slide you were on. But are these affected by LD 2003 or are they?
I'm sorry. For height,
Yeah,
no, the height does not
it
affect it.
hasn't really changed.
No.
Was you're gonna end up with something that looks like a silo?
No, the height restrictions still apply. Yes. I think, is this the slide you're referring to, the last one?
Yeah.
This is sort of a compilation of all the things, right? So ADUs in blue, and you'll see where the P means we already permit it. And so there's just a few that we have to add. And then for minimum lot clarification, you can see we just added that straight down for all of these zoning districts. The only one we didn't add it for is for the T&D because it refers to R4. So that's why that's a no, but all the other things still apply. And so this is just a summary of everything that we have on the books for zoning districts.
I just had a question. So as I understand for ADUs, the state law prescribes minimum lot size of an ADU at 190.
Minimum square footage, yes.
And it says we can set maximum. Are you
Yes.
proposing a maximum?
Yes. So we already have a maximum on existence to it.
750.
Yes. And so that's not changing. Let's see. And for ADUs, if you'll go back up a bit, this one. So this is just a summary on those of what we've done. Again, removing the parking. We added it as a permitted use to a few zoning districts that didn't allow it because they allowed single family. Higgins Beach came up after ordinance committee. Town attorney actually noticed that there's one provision that would not allow a carriage house if you have a rear renovation. And so we can't prohibit it. And Higgins Beach is form-based, so it's not based on use. So that was the only prohibition. So we had to strike that. But you can't do a rear renovation or rear addition if you have a carriage house. We can keep that, but we couldn't keep the carriage house provision. So that's the one thing that was added after ordinance committee for ADUs. So again, this is the summary table and then can answer any questions.
I just want to thank you. I did watch both of the ordinance meetings where you presented, and I think it's just helpful for the public to get it through the council workshop. But any other questions for Autumn on this topic? I think this is important too, because as we go into the GMO conversation, it's good to have this context as we talk about, you know, the growth and management ordinance.
So Autumn, there's a lot here that's very technical. So for anyone at home, I'm just gonna throw out an example. They have a single family home, RF district. They want to build an in-law apartment. Is anything that we're doing here tonight going to prevent them from putting a detached garage with an in-law apartment?
No, as long as they don't already have one.
Unless their septic doesn't permit.
Unless
Or
there's,
another.
yes, that wouldn't change, yeah, right, unless they're in shoreland and they have other restrictions, right.
Any other questions? No? All right, so now we're moving on the GMO. And again, the purpose of this conversation is to really make sure and validate what we have. And then if there are any potential amendments that we may want to discuss or propose that may be coming up at second reading, again, we don't have to leave here today with a list of amendments, but there may be things that people may want to consider. And or there may be some things that people are still thinking about that they haven't fully flushed out. So again, I have a couple things in here as conversation starters for us to kind of at least get the ball rolling. And if anything else pops up that's not in the slides, we can discuss those as well. If we have time during this, we can also do some general public comment if anybody in the public wants to say anything, or again, if we get to 7 o'clock and we don't have time, then we can use the general public comment during the council meeting. So again, these are, I tried to, gather the feedback from all the conversations we've had, public comment, Councilor Corner Live, to kind of at least identify some key areas worth revisiting and discussing as a council. So these are the 5 that I'd like to propose that we talk about. Again, other things that other councilors may want to discuss as we go through this, feel free to add things. So the one thing I heard was, there's still too many exemptions. And so I just want to make sure we look at what is exempted and get a general gut check of what do we want to keep, change, or remove. The actual number itself by area, want to talk about that and make sure that we still feel good about the number or want to propose any changes. The 3-bedroom cap, again, here we kind of chose 20%. It wasn't a scientific selection. And so I think it's worth discussing whether we want to move forward with the 20% or some alternative number. We also have talked about specifically, I think in areas 1 and 2, needing to put a cap on common scheme development. So we have that in the current GMO where we limit common scheme development to a certain percentage, I think 20% in some places, but in the CPD, they get 30% of the growth permits. And so this is trying to figure out where do we need to potentially put a cap on a single development eating all of the permits in a single year or in a single 3-year period. And then the last one is the affordable and workforce housing pool. I think that was something that as we were working through this, Councilor McGee and I tried to come up with a solution, but again, I don't know if people have had other thoughts since then about affordable and workforce housing that we may want to discuss. So if anybody else has anything else that isn't encapsulated in these, feel free to share that now so we can make sure we cover it. Or again, if something comes as we go through this, feel free to share. So again, these are the list of items. I actually was planning to propose that we exempt accessory or do not exempt accessory dwelling units until Autumn was like, no, you can't do that. LD 2003 requires it. So that was one I was trying to remove, but unfortunately we can't change that. And then the next 2, those are existing exemptions that we have had in the current ordinance. And again, I think the intent there is to keep them small. So again, my suggestion is that we keep those. The 2 that I think are really worth debating and aligning on are the next 2, which is dwelling units that are part of a contract zone. Again, I think there's been some concern about the fact that, exempting contract zones could lead to a position where, new projects are coming forward, that if the council supports it, which would require a supermajority still, that, it would just be another way for for growth to come into Scarborough that's not necessarily managed at least through the rate of growth ordinance. And so I think it's worth debating how we feel about that as a council. And then the other one was around manufactured housing. And, you know, today, again, we exempt those as well in our existing ordinance, and it was proposed in this one that we maintain that. So that one's probably also worth revisiting. And talking with Autumn, I think there's only 50 or so planned manufactured housing projects potentially that could come forward. So that's just the cap right now in terms of between Crystal Springs and Pinecrest, what's in their pipeline. So really, when we think about exemptions for that one there, it really is about 50 units. And from Crystal Springs, which I think is the majority, those are 55 and older, so senior unit. So that's just another contextual point. And then the last one, again, we've always had something like this in our ordinance. And I think given what has happened in the past where you had a run on permits where things were taken, this GMO may prevent that to some extent. But again, the intent was if there's a person who buys a lot and wants to build on that property and there's no permits, this would give the code enforcement officer some discretion to issue at least 5 building permits. So maybe starting with contract zones, or I guess, is there any concerns with the first 3 items from anyone that they want to debate? Councilor Hamel?
I don't have specific feedback to each of them. I have a broader question, however, and that is, you know, we talked about the GMO exemptions last about a month ago, right? It was first meeting in April. And, you know, this has come on fast and furious. So are we really, you know, at a point where you have to sort of reconcile these two things? Because the original list of questions I had went right out the window, you know, with this thing. Sorry to say, it's just like, yeah, we are going to say, and I know what the refrain was, well, let's not do any more exemptions. Well, okay, you know, that I guess you hadn't heard much about ADUs yet because you got a bunch. So it's a long wind up for a question here, but my question is, from a process standpoint, we've got the GMO exemption work that you guys have been toiling on we've been toiling on for well over 6 months, 9 months, maybe. You know, we're supposed to do a first reading and vote and recommend to go to the planning board for what's before us. And that, so how are we supposed to do that with the ADU legislation in parallel? I mean, it sounds like, at least if I understand Jean Marie correctly, that's going to happen no matter what. So don't worry about your local process, but
I mean, part of me feels like technically we don't even need the language because state law will supersede it. So the fact that we put it, at least the ADU portion in our ordinance, is almost duplicative and unnecessary because they're already exempt. So in my mind, whether we have the language in there or not, by July 1st, I guess, if the state law goes into effect on July 1st,
they made
ADUs
that
are
part of
exempt.
our job easier.
Yeah,
There you go.
essentially. So the first one is like, you know, it kind of is what it is at this point. Councilor McGee?
I think the only thing I would add to that is the state law changed. Would we still, as a body in
Yeah.
our ordinance locally, still want to be able to exempt ADUs? Or would you just leave it out? And then if the state one goes away, so does ours.
That's a good question. What do councilors think? Councilor Katarina?
It's interesting to bring that up, because that was exactly what I was thinking. I'm thinking, let's keep our own language in there
Mhm.
just in case, because, you know, at the state level, God only knows which way the wind will be blowing in 2 years or 3 years. So let's keep our language in there. If it's, you know, the state supersedes it, so be it, but it's still there
Mhm.
in case.
I guess the question though is if we weren't dealing with LD 2003, would we as a body want ADUs to be exempt or not?
Yes.
So you say
I
yes.
say yes.
From the growth management.
Yeah.
I would say yes. I mean, we're talking, this isn't common scheme of development. This is people adding on to existing lots. So to attack those through the GMO process, I don't know if that's worth it.
Okay.
So.
Any other thoughts on this one?
I would say keep them exempt. To Nick's point, we're not seeing a run on growth in Scarborough because people are putting in ADU in their garage. I think it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is where grandma's gonna live or where your son or daughter's gonna live. It's not. a big development coming in.
Yeah.
They should be exempt.
I think the bigger concern, and it's probably out of scope for both the rate of growth ordinance and LD 2003, even though Autumn referenced it, was STR, short-term rentals.
We're gonna fix that.
And I know that's on the ordinance radar to address that, but I think that's probably more critical to get that in place than
Yeah.
manage it through this. Okay, what about contract zones? So again, my recommendation for conversation was remove it. And the rationale there was, if we have the permits and a project comes forward and wants to build something outside of zoning, then the council could, in theory, through that action, maybe decide if they want to exempt it, but in my mind, direct exemption out the gate, I don't know if that's something we want to put forward, or at least say through the contract zone process, if that comes forward, because that would technically be outside of the zoning, perhaps, that it could still get considered. It just may require that either the council directs that they pull from the growth pool, or the council at the time could exempt them from the rate of growth ordinance if they so choose.
But so isn't it the case, though, that the contract zones are gonna come and go as they will? I mean, we're not gonna be able to prevent them. That's, that's part of, at least until the state decides to change that too. At least we have that. So I had that on my list originally as well. I don't leave it out, but it's like, well, we have it and we've used it, and maybe there's be Piper Shores 3 or whatever, the next contract zone amendment. Those will come and go as they will.
Yeah. Counselor Cucci?
So I just view this as clarifying language. It's really pretty ineffectual, because if a council wants to write a contract zone that exempts a project from the GMO, they can do that. This isn't stopping them. This is just saying, yeah, if the council decides to exempt them in that language, then it's exempt from the ordinance. I think it's just clarifying.
Mhm.
That very question was posed to the town attorney recently, and I'm looking at Autumn. As I recall, his advice was,
Speak to it. So the way it's written right now, where it says that it's exempt only if the contract zone exempts it, is good. But if you were to strike it and not speak to it at all, it's not clear. And that's what the town council advised us, to make sure that we address it one way or the other, but not to be silent.
So it's not saying that all contract zones are
Right.
automatically exempt. It's saying, okay,
Just says if the contract zone process exempts them, so another decision, then it's exempt.
essentially what it would do is create an opportunity for them to request relief. Typically, contract zone comes forward because a project doesn't fit for one reason or another. One of those reasons could certainly be that there's not adequate growth permits to support the project. I would always recommend council keep as much flexibility. You don't know we can't sit here and dream up what a good project is. As you all well know, the contract zone process is controlled entirely by this body.
mhm.
It does add some additional rigors, the public benefit. And I know can be challenging at times. But if I were you, I would want to maintain maximum flexibility, knowing all the while you can say no.
So I think Counselor Cucci, your point, and Autumn, your clarification to me are important for the public to understand that we're not saying all contract zones are exempt. We're saying if we go through the contract zone process with an exemption and that gets approved, then they're exempt from the growth management ordinance, right? Which is a little bit of
Yes.
a,
And you make that determination only after you see the project, understand its benefit, and, make an informed decision.
It's kind of clarifying whether, so your contract zone supersedes your zoning. Technically, this is part of the zoning, so I would view it as it would supersede this as well, but that may not be legally clear. That might be what the attorney's saying.
Mhm.
This just helps add clarity to it, that if a council does exempt it and then you still have this other ordinance there, they're
Mhm.
not, at least they're aligned.
Yeah. And it's still a 2/3 vote for the council.
For contract zone,
yeah.
it's super majority.
Yeah, so that's another extra layer of scrutiny that it would have to go through. All right, so I would change, if I would move my X over to keep at this point. Any other, Counselor McGee?
Can I just ask Tom to clarify something you just said? And I don't want to make sure I
Mhm.
understood it correctly. Did you just say if there were no permits left in any of the pools, that would be grounds for somebody to come to us for a contract zone request?
That would be, could be an area of relief that they seek. Yes.
I have a problem with that.
So have we ever done that? Have we ever given permits where we're out of permits, where we have allowed a contract zone exemption or amendment?
I can say that a number of the recent contract zones did include an exemption from the GMO. Yes, whether that was because we had no more to give, I suspect that was the rationale. The ones that come to mind were the Beacon Apartments, Piper Shores had a similar.
But they were worded as, if there's no more, then you're exempt. And I think in the way it actually played out, they used permits.
Fair point. Yeah, go to the pool, use what's left first, and then if you need more, you can have whatever you need to complete the project.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments on the contract zone? Is everybody okay generally keeping it?
I'm still wrapping my mind around what he just said. So part of our effort and our exercise was to prevent the developers going through this process constantly with the council being the final vote. And I just, now I'm uncomfortable if we wipe out the permit pool within year one, every new developer or a development is now going to be in front of us with the contract zone saying there's no permits left.
But we can't stop people from requesting contract zone.
But we can say no.
We can say no to them, but we can't block there has
I
to be
guess
a
the-
process in place.
I guess
So if they're.
criteria that not enough permits is enough for them to come to us with a contract zone request.
I wouldn't think that our contract zone language in the ordinance allows for not having permits as a qualified reason to come forward.
It's not, you have to be doing something outside of.
Right.
the
Yeah.
zoning.
Outside of the zone.
So you
Okay.
have
Yeah.
to be taller or more impervious cover or
Yes.
something creative. And then you have to
Right.
provide public benefit. So there has to be something other than you just can't, right?
Yeah.
So it does have some
And-
language. there.
And frankly, if this revision is done appropriately, and it looks as though you're headed in that direction, most needs should be satisfied through the mechanisms you've already set up, and it will be the exception to the rule. Instead of it being overrun by contract zone requests.
Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong. The whole thing with contract zones is it's like. You have to have exhausted everything else, and it's not, you can't come. Right out of the gate with contract zone because of whatever, and they're supposed to be used. Infrequently,
Mhm.
because in fact, they're avoiding zoning is what it is, and it's spot zoning, which is illegal.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
am I right?
But-
Right, you have to meet a special circumstance that you just can't meet with the zone.
And also with that, as I recall, as a practical matter, there's generally some informal discussion and an indication given. From representatives of the council as to the feasibility of starting the process.
We have this is where we have that robust documented process of all the things we're supposed to do, and there's like a preliminary. We give it a thumbs up, we give it some direction. It's a very long burdensome process. And so the people who come through it really want to justify their
Right.
need. And then some things are like weird that we've had to experience, like with the Mercedes dealership,
Oh.
where again, technically that was never zoned for that. So every time they want to make a change, which I think they've made 6 or 7, every time they want to make an adjustment, they have to start the entire process and go through all of those details, which is cumbersome. So I think that was something we talked about at
Mhm.
some point, needing to consider some projects like that one, so that anytime they want to add on like 200 square feet, they don't have to come to the council and
One
make a
thing,
request.
one thing they know for sure, they don't want to be asking us for input on design.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. All right, so now are we good to move on to the next one? So next is manufactured housing. And again, just to prompt conversation, the thought was to potentially remove this given the small number. Though the same argument could be made that keeping it is okay because of the small number that are anticipated. So again, any thoughts on exempting manufactured housing?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts, because I was on the planning board when is it the Springs? I don't know what it is.
Crystal Springs.
Crystal
Crystal
Spring.
Springs And I mean, I know we went through this whole process of changing the wording, so they're now manufactured housing. I mean, these are homes. These are not trailers, these are flat out homes, and I think that's something that we need to consider is when we talked about it previously, I think we were thinking about something different in what they looked like. You know, when I think about the springs as well, you have 55 plus, but that also means they're gonna be pulling on our resources more, because as we learned recently during the budget process, our EMS is about 80%. And that's, so you are putting in senior housing in this manufactured housing, and they will be using our services, I think, more than a family like myself. I know there's only a small right now, but we don't know what the future is gonna hold. So those are some of the thoughts that I have about it,
Mhm.
is I do think it's just a residence. I think it's just another term for a home.
Counselor Cucci?
So I think most of these would probably qualify as replacement units. Are they usually pulling out like a mobile unit and putting in a
Yeah.
more permanent?
Yes, in the instance of Crystal Springs, they are replacing 30 existing units with new units. And so technically, they may actually fall under the replacement.
They would
and
get it
repair
under there.
exemption in that instance. But perhaps if they added on and created a new one, to your point, maybe that might be actually a good way to handle it. So the replacement units fall under the exemption because they are an improvement and they're new. Any new.
Now, this gets really complicated. So a manufactured home, if it's built a certain way, doesn't require a building permit, it requires an electrical permit.
Right.
The trigger for your growth permit is you can't get a building permit until you get that. But if you don't need a building permit, then you don't need a growth permit. So this one is, you might want to ask legal, because I don't, again, it may have little effect. I think we do give building permits for most of the.
We do.
Give building permits within, they need connections to septic, sewer, water.
Okay, so there's
We
a,
give building permits, and we actually, yes.
Okay.
But most of them so far have been replaced.
Autumn, can I ask you to join us? Just, I'm afraid we're not catching.
Scoot it out there and.
So I think that the good point, or the interesting point is, at least for Crystal Springs, which is like the majority, I think, of things that would change, those kind of fall under a different category of repair and replace likely. So when we're talking about net new, it's probably 20, but to Counselor Shoup's point, there might be other homes that pop up of this style in the future. And so do we want to, that are new, so do we want to exempt those? Counselor Seiler, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say pretty simply that I think my leaning is to remove the exemption. If there's a legal way to do it such that we're not infringing on John's catch-22 here about needing building permits and not, therefore not needing a growth permit. But if there is a way to remove new existing units from the GMO or remove them from the exemption process, I view them the same as Karen. I think those should be viewed as single family homes, I think.
Any Counselor McGee or Counselor Katerina?
Well, I'm scratching my head here, and again, this is from the real estate point of view, because the difference between modular homes and manufactured homes and mobile homes, and manufactured homes and mobile homes aren't considered real estate. They depreciate over time. Which most people don't understand that. So that, I don't know, that's why I'm struggling with you exempt. them
There's no
from-
deed transferred. It's a bill of sale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they've got HUD certificates or whatever, it doesn't matter. I mean, so they. And they are a good way to provide affordable housing to certain groups of people. So I don't know, I'm up in the air on them.
So I did ask Teresa DeFossis about this exemption. She didn't seem to value it, or mind it going away. So that would put me in, I guess,
Okay.
with April, where if it's legal, I'm okay letting it go. And most of the ones that that we deal with, I think would be considered replacement units anyway.
Yeah, I think Hillcrest is fully built out. Pinecrest just has an expansion. I'm not aware that they have any intentions where they have extra land to expand to. So I think it is Crystal Springs turning over existing units.
And to make it, you feel even better about it, any new manufactured home requires a contract zone approval. So
Ah.
you would get to see it and that way.
Yeah. So I'm getting the sense that assuming there's no legal constraints, we're good
Yeah.
striking this particular one as an amendment at second read. Okay. All right, any other things on exemptions? Is there anything anybody wants to add as an exemption? Should I even ask that? Or should we just move to the next part? Okay, let's move on. All right. So next is the actual pace of growth. So the number of units per area. So again, just to review some things with everybody, just as a reminder, based on the analysis that was done, if we were to follow the state minimum requirements, our target for growth would be 224 units a year. Under the existing GMO, it's currently allowing for approximately 300 units per year, with more exemptions than what we've just kind of discussed, in addition to that council exemption process. The proposal that we put forward, taking out the affordable housing pool, is at 228 units per year on average. Again, we're doing the 3-year pool, so that's just an average. It doesn't mean that it's 228 per year. It could be higher or lower, but capped at a 3-year amount, that would be essentially 228 units per year. Again, if you take out if you add in the affordable housing pool and again did a 3-year average, that's another 33 units per year. And again, we got some analysis from GP Cog. Just, I was curious to see if we changed the allocation or the numbers, what that would mean from a financial perspective. Again, this was specifically to the CPD, looking at TIF benefit. And again, my takeaway from the analysis, and I'm sure you guys all saw it, it's in the packet, there really wasn't much incremental gain the more we grew, which again, I was just curious to see, like, do we see a lot more growth with just slight increases? But it didn't seem that sensitive. So adding a lot more units doesn't necessarily, expand the TIF benefit significantly. So again, area 1, we had that as 25 per year. And so this is the one area that is not a 3-year pool. It is strictly 25 units per year in area 1. The recommendation there, I think, for me, is to keep it as is for discussion. Area 2, we have 210 over 3 years, which is an average of 70 per year. And then area 3 for the CPD is 400 units over a 3-year period, which is an average of 133 units per year. My recommendation for consideration is that we raise this to 450 units over a 3-year period, which is essentially 150 units a year. The rationale there is, under our current GMO, based on the 289 exemptions and the 43 units per year, and the fact that 3i Home was considered exempt under the affordable housing exemption, that total of permits is really 469 units. So we've essentially cut, with the current one at 400 units, 69 units. And so again, for discussion for the council, my suggestion is we consider raising that a little bit, really just to consider the projects that are already in flight, with the 289, the 43, and the 3i Home project. So it's still lower than what was committed, but at least kind of tries to get a little bit closer to what's in the current GMO.
Question.
Councilor McGee had his hand up.
So the 3i Home project, it would be exempted under our current, correct? So I think they have all their approvals. Am I mistaken?
They do not. So our current gives you a growth permit at building permit. So they just received their site plan approval Monday night. So under our current, they're probably a year away from building permits. So they don't have growth permits. That's one.
Thank you.
So that's the kind of the big point to add back in. The 50 is to essentially enable the 3i project. And again, I think it's the timing thing, because I think right now it would have been included, and a lot of work is underway, it seems, to move that forward. So it's almost kind of grandfathering that in to some extent in this 3-year pool. Counselor Hamel?
What number effort is this? You, I think, probably worked on 2 of the 3, but was this our third in like 18 months or 24 months?
This is our, well, it depends on what you mean. So we did one, maybe my first year on the council, and then we had a conversation around the exemption last September, which actually led to the effort for Counselor McGee and I to kind of work on this third effort. So
So it does, the question keeps coming up, why do we need a to do GMO exemptions? And it seems like it never really ever goes away, or if it does, not for very long. So I don't know that we've ever had a simple time where we followed the state minimum precisely. So but the amount of effort that we devote to this is considerable. I'm just wondering if there's a easier way to do it, or if this is just the nature of the beast.
well, the hope is this current one
Yeah.
sticks for 3 years
So
and we really
it
follow
would be better than the last 3.
the law, yeah, and say, this is it for 3 years. We're removing the ambiguity, we're making it specific, we're adding caps. So we're trying to do the right things that create predictability, at least for 3 years, because that's what the state law requires. So every 3 years, council has to revisit this. Doesn't mean they have to change it. So if future councils like this approach and model, then it may be a tweak versus an overhaul. Like, I think we've tried to really kind of think about something that could live in perpetuity. That, again, depending on what's happening in the community, there may be need to lower things, or if we get to a point in the future where we really want to invest in growth, then we can increase numbers, essentially, especially in area 2. What this does do is it stymies, high, like large complexes, specifically the one that comes to mind and is the Enterprise Business Park one that
Yep.
It was a Lennar Homes project for 330 units. This GMO would not allow large projects like that to happen. And so there may be a time in the future where counselors and our different growth areas want to see more larger multifamily units. So I think from a values and growth perspective, essentially what this GMO is creating is a situation where, small, medium-sized multifamily units are allowable in area 2, but these big, large projects aren't. And so I think that's kind of a policy value discussion for this council. When you look at area 2 specifically and say 210 units, we're essentially creating a situation that these big, large projects may not be able to come to Scarborough.
Without a CEA or a 10.
With, well, contract zone, as long as it's not in area 2 and zone for housing. So it would have to be in a non-housing, either a non-housing, or they would have to go outside of whatever our ordinance is, which again could be height or other factors that may make them eligible for a contract zone.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you want to raise it to 450, and what you're saying is when you, in your mind, because you're thinking about the 3i Home project. I mean, how many units are they proposing? Are you specifically saying
51.
that we are reserving 51 building units over that 3-year period specifically for that? So are they reserved? So if we cut down to the pool, or if they're not first in line, and then, then I know further down, we're talking about not giving so many permits to one developer at a time.
Mhm. I mean, we could probably add language to try and make it specific that 51 or up to 51 of those units are dedicated to affordable. Right now, the CPD does have a requirement that at least 10% of their units are required to be affordable. But again, this number, the 400, again, prior to working through this exercise, the Downs or the CPD was essentially committed to the 289 units plus the 43 units per year that they were allocated in the GMO. And that excluded the 51 units. So again, they have been in the process of planning for 460 plus units. And so this at least kind of takes the things that have already been previously approved or planned and keeps it whole for at least this 3-year period.
I mean, I struggle because people want us to slow down the pace of growth and you're saying, oh, well, let's increase it because we know of one project. And here we are kind of, again, because of one person, one particular situation, we want to add 50 units. I mean, I don't see why there isn't enough in the 400. If this was part of the plan of the CPD is to put units like this in there, I think 400 is sufficient.
Okay.
So a couple pages down, when you have the pool for workforce and affordable, you restrict the Downs use of those permits to just workforce. I don't fully appreciate, I guess, why. I guess what I'm trying to rationalize is why can't they just use those? Why not allow them to use those pools for 3I, that pool for 3I instead of increasing their allocation? But
I think that's another option. I think the thought was, Counselor McGee, you wanna?
Yeah, so where the CPDs are required to do 10% of their build out as affordable housing. What I didn't want to see happen was that pool of affordable housing, which should be used in other areas of town, non-CPD, gets used up by CPD, which is already required to put it in. So I didn't want that to be a new pool for them to use to build that type of housing when it could be used by other developers to build that type of housing in other areas of town.
I don't care where we build affordable housing.
I don't care either.
I mean,
Somebody wants to build it, great.
right, but you've already getting it out of the CPD district based on their zoning. So that was the thought behind that.
All right, any other thoughts on the 450? I actually like Counselor Clucci, your idea. So maybe when we get to the affordable pool, we can revisit of, do we just allow the CPD or any, like, do we have to restrict it? We're gonna talk a little bit about common scheme development caps, which would include that pool, so that again, could also address Counselor McGee's concern that any one developer could take all of the affordable housing permits, so.
That's true.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some mechanism so that we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket or, in one particular, district. And I went back and reviewed notes from a prior meeting where we were kind of asking the developers what they thought, and the majority of them thought we don't really need it. But I believe there is a need for us to find some mechanism to make sure that the competition is fair.
All right, any other thoughts on the 450 or? Counselor McGee?
No, I'm okay for now. Thank you.
I just wanted to add to, there was some discussion about hotel conversion over to some utilizing possibly affordable permits to do the conversion. And so that was the other thing, is you wanted to give them the flexibility to still complete a conversion like that down the road.
For the pool?
And
Counselor
Mr.
Kettering?
Chair, if we could just make sure that when we're talking affordable and workforce, there's two different definitions. I know a lot of people talk about affordable housing, meaning affordable for people, but there are specific definitions to those, and as you know, I'm in this workforce housing.
Yep.
So we want to make sure we get that missing middle in there taken care of with whatever we're doing with these permits.
And these ones in the pool, which we'll get to, why don't we jump there, because we're kind of talking about it. These were intended to be 30-year deed restricted for both affordable and workforce, which are based on income requirements. And so, again, the intent behind this, which I think is to be determined. I mean, we know there are some projects in the queue, like the 3i Home, who could use this today, but does having this pool incentivize development to come? Are we going to see these get used? We did exempt 10 workforce housing projects in the current one, and I don't think they've gotten used. So exempting them or making them available doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to come, which is kind of
Well, you need
One-
a carrot.
Yeah.
You need a carrot with it, because to build anything, and I'm looking at developers sitting out there, it's expensive to build something. So that's the whole conundrum, is when you build something in order to get a profit, because people have a right to a profit when they build, is how do you make it affordable for you know, either the affordable housing or the workforce housing.
Mhm.
That is the conundrum, and that's part of why those 10 permits that I got thrown into the mix a few years ago. You know, it was right before things went like this with how, you know, housing costs, so they
Mhm.
didn't get used. So I would like us to really look at, you know, and one of the things with that hotel conversion thing that I had been working on is what's, you know, how can we make this work for
Yeah.
people?
Well, and the current 10, I'll say, is limited and focused on single family. I think that's
Right.
another reason that we've
Yeah.
not seen any develop. Whereas our workforce housing definition would allow for rental to
Yeah.
qualify as
Mhm.
well.
And yeah, so again, for this one, for the pool itself, we said at least for the 3-year period, let's do 100. But once it got to like 50% used up or something, I think we said that would be brought forward to the council for consideration. Again, doesn't mean you have to refill it, but at least the council would be aware. So that if projects come up that are interesting that we want to pursue, or if we decide we do want to support the conversions for hotels, we could direct them to this pool and have them use this pool. And then if there are certain projects that are worth it that come forward, the council would always have the discretion to replenish the pool. If the council so choose.
Yeah, I think it's limited and it's very focused, and I'm able to distinguish this versus remember back in the 80s, we had a big growth permit pool, you know, it took us a long time to burn
Mhm.
through that.
Yeah. So my thought wasn't thinking quite along the lines of Councilor Pucci of allowing the Downs to use this pool. My thought was if we gave the CPD the 450, that we could reduce this pool. But again, I feel like it's the same thing of like just saying they can access this instead for the 50 for the 3i Home project if we didn't make it so restrictive that they couldn't use it for affordable.
They can access this pool. They just can't access it to build affordable.
Yes.
They can access it to build workforce, which
Mhm.
is a lower standard, or I don't know, I didn't say that right, but it's, you might make money building a workforce housing.
Mhm.
So I didn't see a strong need for that, and what I very really might happen is they might take 100 permits to build workforce and the 50 you're giving them for 3i on the other side. I was kind of thinking along lines of Karen, I guess, where why not just let them attach this pool, and if they build them great, we can replenish it.
Mhm. Okay. Councilor Scyther, you have a thought.
Oh, I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding what Counselor Cucci is saying. So I just want to I do think that we, at this point, from a council perspective, I want to make sure that we honor the 3i project, given that it's already in the pipeline, and I don't want to make it so that we're twisting ourselves into knots to make sure that that project comes to fruition. And if that means increasing the first, I'm a little bit lost now in terms of where these permits are coming from, and I just want to make sure that the numbers reconcile still.
So what I would think is if we keep the 400 in the CPD as it's currently listed, then we would potentially adjust the pool to allow the Downs to have access to this for affordable, because that is an affordable project. And so then, as long as they get site plan approval and everything, they're eligible to pull from this pool for those 50 permits.
Okay, so now walk me back one more step and remind me what the rationale was for not allowing them to pull from this pool originally.
Because they're required by zoning
Okay.
to have at least 10% of their, I think it's the only zone that's
It
required
is.
to have the 10%
Okay,
affordable.
gotcha.
I will
Council- or not
offer
Counselor.
either way that you do it, 3i has permits as soon as this is approved. There are only residential, so there's 51 growth permits either from the Downs or from the affordable pool.
Yeah. Are they the only
Yeah.
affordable project in the pipeline right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The Downs has other multifamily projects that are following, but 3i is the first. So
Okay.
those permits would be taken away as soon as this is approved.
All right, any other thoughts on this pool? No? All right. So going back to 3-bedroom caps. So again, I think a lot of this kind of started with the exemption that we gave to the CPD district where we did add a cap. And so that concept of creating a 3-bedroom cap has carried forward. And so really this only applies to areas 2 and 3. So essentially in area 2, it would be 42 units over the 3-year period. In area 3, it would be 80. Again, if we were to change those numbers and increase it to 35%, which was in the GPCOG analysis, that would be 74 and 140 units. When you look at the GPCOG analysis, what was interesting was changing the percentages, if you factored in the cost to serve, didn't significantly change the net benefit to the town and the TIF district. So that was something that Tom and I, when we got questioned and wanted to understand, like, why was there so little flux when all of a sudden you're adding 3 more, like more 3 bedrooms? And I think it just was a matter of the fact there were 2 things at play. One was the value of those were higher. And so even with the cost to serve, you kind of netted out so that you kind of broke even. The other piece was they were considering a small student per unit ratio, but they cautioned to say that could fluctuate and change and go up higher. So even though in their analysis that they provided, it broke even, or it didn't break even, there was still, you know, essentially $2 million per year of net benefit that the town could use on other things outside of the cost to serve. They said in the future, that number could go down based on, you know, the fact that if there's a school there, more people might want to live in those 3 bedrooms that want to walk to a school. So just to be cautious of future turnover. So again, that was just the guidance from them. Again, if you look at the current GMO that we have in place today, essentially in the CPD, they're allowed for up to 45% of their permits to be 3-bedroom. It's kind of silent. There's 20% that says in the 289, they can only do a max of 289. But the assumption would be the 43, there were no restrictions on those being 3 bedrooms or not. So when you add the 43 each year plus the 20% of the 289, that's about 45%. And again, they've been working on the downtown master plan under the assumption that they were getting up to 45% for 3-bedroom. So again, for conversation with the council, again, I still feel like, at least at this stage, maintaining the 3%, or sorry, the 20% until we have a school approved, to me feels like a conservative, cautious approach that I'm more comfortable with. But if others are willing to entertain a higher percentage for 3-bedroom, you know, I'm willing to consider it. Councilor Pucci.
I don't have an issue with a higher percentage. I'm a little more concerned that we're not going to get any 3 bedrooms because you're going to have a 1 or 2 bedroom complex come in and take all the permits. So I'd almost rather see that number be between 20 and 30% will be 3 bedrooms or more. So almost holding out some of the permits for 3-bedroom.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom not that long ago was that 3 bedrooms were anathema, right? I didn't want them at all. And now with this, LD 2003, we're getting lots more units, much smaller, but is the impact going to be a lot less? It could be the same, it could be worse. So I don't think we know. I mean, but I like what John had to say about that.
I like that too, just in terms of like, because I agree, like you've brought that up multiple times throughout this process, and I think it comes in and comes out. I don't think it made the amendment, but you've always talked about encouraging a certain amount, not just capping it. So I would be comfortable maybe adjusting this to say 20 to 30% could be 3-bedroom, with 30% being on the upper end. Again, my personal concern is if we don't get a school project that passes, the analysis that was done in the enrollment study showed that 3-bedroom apartments had a higher impact on the school than single family. And so that's like what's in the back of my mind when we think of this number. And so again, the net effect though for the cost to serve and the impact to the town, I think would still be things that we could afford. It's just the school is like in the back of my mind and makes me nervous.
But I think the enrollment study did assume the 45% 3-bedroom in the CPD.
That's true.
So either way, you're cutting that back a little.
And the school is planning for that, the higher end number
Right.
too. Okay, so what I'm hearing is maybe changing to add a slight language that basically says in CPD, we would require up or 20%, but up to 30% for 3-bedroom.
Something.
Okay, I can support that. Any thoughts or concerns on that? No, all right,
I would be okay with area 2 as well for that,
area 2.
for that.
I think we should be consistent,
Yeah.
to be fair.
I think having some diversity in the mix is a good thing, so.
Okay. All right.
Hold on, I'm slow. You all know I am a relatively slow processor compared to some of you guys. I know that. So the language change has what effect exactly? Like, rather than saying we're open to up to 20%, you would like to essentially change that to say up to 30%,
So essentially.
but also require
At
a
least,
minimum.
Yeah, so essentially what we would be saying, like, what's happening right now is we're saying in area 2 and 3, they could develop up to 42 and 80 3-bedroom units, but it's not required. So they may not do 3-bedroom units. They may do 0 and it's all 1 and 2-bedroom apartments. What we're saying is we want to encourage diversity in housing options by saying they, at a minimum, must build at least 42 3-bedroom units, but not to exceed, whatever 30% of 210 is.
Okay,
And in the CPD, at a minimum, they must produce 80 3-bedroom units, not to exceed 100 or whatever the 30% would be.
okay. So I'm clear on what the language would indicate. I guess where a little bit of discomfort comes in is that I feel like I'm pretty far out of my comfort zone now in terms of detailing what kind of housing and the exact percentages and what number of apartments that's going to mean and whether or not that changes developers' building plans and if that changes mixed use. And I kind of feel like that is not my area of expertise at all. And so saying, yes, requiring a certain number of 3 bedrooms, I don't know that I necessarily need to frame it that I'm in control of the percentage there. So I think I'm a little out of my comfort zone.
Well, again, we're not, this is all for discussion to think
Yeah,
about, and
absolutely.
like, as we craft amendments, we all might change our mind or have other ideas, so I think this
Sure,
is more
I'm
to
just
get-
letting you know where I am.
That's good. Any other thoughts on?
I'm just gonna follow too, like generally speaking, I do find it a little odd that we're gonna mandate kind of the floor and the ceiling on this. The idea behind limiting, in my mind, was always to make sure we didn't overrun the schools with a school age population. And so actually putting the floor on it as well as the ceiling. I mean, yes, we're managing that growth to some extent. It's just, why dictate it to that extent? Why not just say not to exceed, which means we're, considering building out a school that will absorb this many children. We know what that is. Please don't go above this, because otherwise we're not going to be absorbing them by the time they hit the school system. You see what I mean? Like, not sure about I mean, I understand, diversity in housing stock. I just don't know if I want to be as prescriptive to do the floor and the ceiling. I'd rather just say, please just don't exceed this number. That's just my 2 cents.
So the number though is 30%. 30% okay for you? Because I think we're talking 20 to 30% range. Not counselor.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
20 to
I
counselor.
have an administration concern with a minimum requirement for 3 bedrooms. Who has to do the 3 bedrooms first, right? So in area 2, it's all over the town. So there's a minimum 3 bedrooms. That's a different sort of administration issue. Does every project, so if there's 5 homes, that's just a concern. I understand the intent behind requiring the minimum. Now, maybe in area 3, you could do it, but area 2 is a little trickier.
Mhm.
So the other thing I'm trying to hedge against is we've got a number of developments that have been in process for many years. Predominantly one, single family or, duplexes. I want to make sure they have a stream, they have access to permits to finish out what they've started. My concern, as this is where it is, they're going to be left with 20% of what, I forget what the area 2 total is.
210.
So they'll be left with 41 units over 3 years to finish up Dunstan. I mean, I can think of 5 developments. I just don't know that that's enough.
Okay.
That was what I was trying to guard against.
So maybe, again, maybe 20% is too low and we need a higher number. I'm gonna ask Counselor Pucci, because you're really good with numbers. If you wouldn't mind doing some number,
I'll try
helping
clarify that. I'll
to think
reach out to you
what
on-
would be a good percentage that considers that, so that we
There
have-
might be another way to go
Yeah.
to solve for that.
You may find that you don't need the cap at all for area 2. That you just have 210 building permits available and zoning in place. And see what you get. For the, especially for those, because those existing neighborhoods that are just building out.
I would lean that way.
And going back to your point about the enrollment study, I think it assumed these could be 3 bedrooms as well.
135 for,
Yeah, so they were assuming that, so at least the school today is building with, or their plans project a project that assumes what Autumn just mentioned, that there is no cap on 3 bedrooms and,
It assumes zoning.
yeah,
And so taking that away would build for zoning.
all right, so I don't know if we've reached a conclusion, but this is a good conversation on this one. It seems like this still needs to get addressed, and we need to figure out a proper amendment to get proposed between now and the 21st. So the last one that I want to make sure we touch in the next 9 minutes was a cap on common scheme development. And so again, here, you know, we never really contemplated that. And so the recommendation would be a 50% cap. So again, what that means effectively in area 1 would be no single development in that 3-year period could develop more than 13 units as a single project. And in area 2, the same thing. So again, if one big 105 unit multifamily complex wanted to come in, this would make it so that only they could only do it up to 105 units. And again, that was to try and not have a situation where one big project comes and takes all the permits. So any thoughts, reactions? Is 50% the right number? Is this necessary? I know Counselor Shoup, this was an area you had interest, so just curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think my question was, I do think I was asking if we were limiting, and I think, you know, my fear is that, you know, you'd have one developer or someone just come out of nowhere and get all the permits right away. And you also might have all this other stuff in the queue and all this other things. And, you know, I think we need to be mindful of everything that's going on in the town and not give it to one developer.
Does 50% feel like appropriate, or what's your thoughts on that?
I don't feel qualified to say that 50%. I don't know what development looks like. And I don't know how quickly people develop within 3 years. So I really don't know.
Yeah, this is where I tried to ask Autumn, at least in area 2, it was like, well, what's considered a small multifamily project and what would be a medium? And I don't know, I think we said like 20 to 50 would be small, medium. So again, you know, I don't know if there are 100 unit projects or maybe something of that nature that would come, but essentially my thought was, how do we make sure that we allow for small and medium sized multifamily projects so that it's not just one big project that eats it up?
I believe we have one in the pipeline, right?
It's not able to go through this process. The enterprise?
No, not Enterprise, the Mussey Road.
AR?
Oh,
Yeah.
AR.
Were they 110 units?
Yes, yes. They already have building permits.
Oh, they do?
Right,
Okay.
yeah, we don't have to
Never
worry.
mind
about
then.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify something real quick? And I don't know if it's a typo, if I'm doing bad math
Could be
in
a
my head.
typo.
Area 1, it says 50%, no more than 13 units to common scheme development.
Oops.
In that
Yeah.
1 3-year period. That's per year, right? Because it's 25 per year in area
Yes.
1.
Yes.
per,
So the affordable
So over a
work,
3-year period to be 39 units.
yeah,
Okay, that's,
but again, these are issued per year. So I would think this would apply per year, not,
yeah, the way it was written.
Yeah.
is-
Mhm. My bad.
Have we talked about whether or not there needs to be a mechanism for what happens if there are still permits available, but it's a single developer has already pulled 50%? Like they just then, even if nobody else wants them, they can't have them?
So we have that in the GMO, right? That it says nothing carries over. Right, year to
So the
year.
way that this is worded is 50% of, a developer should only plan on 50% of this number,
So you're, sorry,
even if no one else wants them.
I hear you, I hear you.
right?
That's a
Um,
good point. I mean, if it's November and you have a bunch of permits sitting there and you got a developer who got their 50% in January. So,
Just, I have a quick question. I should know the answer to this and I can't remember. When are permits given? Are they given as soon as they're approved for the development, or are they given when they're ready to put the shovel in the ground?
So for single family, your one-off, single family building, they'd be done with building permit, but if a site plan's required, so for multifamily like 3I, site plans approved, they would get their growth permits with the site plan approval.
Okay.
So 3I, if this were in effect, they essentially also applied for 51 growth permits, which won't work for the 50% on the affordable pool.
mhm.
right.
So me, I don't know if 50, but it's a good point of like, is there some discretion
Yeah.
that's given to the planning director, somebody
Right.
to do something?
In the 11th hour, it just
Yeah.
seems like we're being restrictive. And if the reason we're being restrictive is to eliminate a single developer from gobbling them all up, and that's our true intent, then if no one else wants them and we get to a certain point in the year, then they should be up for grabs.
Yeah,
If this is some kind of,
Yeah.
dodgy way of making sure that all the permits don't get used, then I take issue with maybe all this language, but
yeah.
I just think we need to have a mechanism for releasing those permits if in fact nobody else wants them.
I think that's fair. I think we can can we think of some amendment language that we would add that would address Counselor Scyther's?
Sure. I would also offer, I think when it first came up, the worry was about the CPD taking all the permits. And we've separated the CPD now, so we've
Right.
almost probably taken away 90% of that concern.
Mhm.
But I'll see if I can come up with something.
Okay, something that protects against that. Counselor Cucci?
Yeah, I don't see a need for the common scheme cap on the affordable workforce pool.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary there.
Okay.
And obviously for area 3, it's only one scheme anyways.
Mm.
This would be, I could live with none here. All right, so just to kind of quickly summarize, and again, if there's other things outside of this that other counselors want to propose as amendments prior to the 21st, my ask would be just to get those 24 hours in advance so that we can have everything ready and available and included in the packet for discussion. There might be some administrative things that we may want to also consider that weren't contemplated today. These are like the big areas to focus. So just to quickly summarize what I think I heard for the dwelling for manufactured, we talked about removing. We're going to keep the contract zone. For the pace of growth, we're essentially going to keep it the same, but to enable 3I, we're going to allow the Downs access to potentially have an amendment that allows the Downs to have access to the affordable housing pool and not limit common scheme development there. For the 3-bedroom caps, there's still some work to be done to figure out what the right number is. And how do we move this forward and debate amend max, is amend max the appropriate path, or do we just do a max cap? Again, at least for now, some cap on areas 1 and 2, and then for common scheme development, and then an affordable and workforce. Continue this, move it forward with some tweaks that I just brought up. Any other things I missed in summary? No? All right.
John, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Counselor Cucci.
I know. So one thing that I think we need to figure out is the transition. So right now, this allows a certain number of permits for 3 years and then none. So if we don't take action, essentially this ordinance wouldn't be in compliance with state law. So I think that needs to be either this sunsets and like the whole ordinance sunsets in 3 years or there's a renewal, like
Yeah.
something that, just some sort of transition.
Yeah, so we talked about that, and I think we were thinking that would be more of an administrative adjustment that we would bring forward as an amendment. That's kind of what's the process to review and create predictability so that if we do make a big change, or if the council does want to make a big change, I think we were suggesting they do that earlier than the year so that projects that are in the pipeline have awareness before the council changes the ordinance and overhauls it, so that the development community and the public can plan appropriately. So those are things that we talked about. We didn't bring them here for discussion, but I'd be interested in Councilor Clucci, like more specifics from you so that we can make sure we incorporate it appropriately as an amendment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that in 2 years, we're not only allowing 25 single family homes in all of Scarborough.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is if we don't think through that transition, that's the
Yep.
way this would read, I think.
Great. All right, with that, let's do a quick 5-minute recess and then come back for the general meeting. And again, if anybody here wants to comment on the workshop, you can do so during general public comment. All right, I'm calling this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, June 7th. This is our regularly scheduled town council meeting. Will everybody please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the next item on the agenda is roll call. Tody, can you please call the roll?
Counselor Seither?
Here.
Pucci?
Here.
Counselor Shu?
Here.
Counselor Katarina?
Here.
Kimmel?
Here.
Counselor McGee?
Here.
And Chairman Anderson?
Here.
All present. Thank you.
All right, the next item, item number 4 is general public comment. If there's anybody who would like to comment on anything not on the agenda, if you could please come to the podium. If you could state your name for the record, and again, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Nina McKee, 309 Black Point Road. You guys are terrific. This is tough, this whole thing. And I think it was Councilor McGee that said at one point during a workshop, maybe we should just get rid of the GMO and revise the zoning ordinance. Sounds like it might be a good idea. But anyway, I had a few questions, whether you can answer them, I'll just ask them. According to the adding all this up, I think I came to, if the Downs has 400 units, that in 3 years, we will have built 959 units. Does that sound about right?
Sorry,
Over
so-
3 years?
So it's 400 over the 3-year period. So they
So it's 133
33 per year.
per year. Okay, well, I think we ought to keep the Downs at 400. I really do. I think the Downs has gotten a lot of good deals, and that's no criticism, but it's just there. And I think 400 is plenty. And I'm just curious about if there are going to be changes in the impact fees, whether that will affect the growth.
So Town Manager Hall actually in his town manager report is going to talk a little bit about our plan to update impact fees. And so hopefully as he gives that update, it might answer some of your questions around that.
But thank you. Well, I just hope you can keep it to 400 for the Downs. Thank you very
Great,
much.
thank you.
Hi, Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue. First of all, that was a great workshop. Thank you all very much. It's very complicated and even more complicated for, the citizen paying attention who's trying to understand it as well. I would just want to go back to kind of the beginning and starting with the 2021 community survey, where 2/3 of the respondents said that the pace of growth and the development in Scarborough is occurring too fast or much too fast. And that the pace of community growth and expansion cited by 73% of the respondents to the survey, they cited that growth was the #1 most significant issue Scarborough faces over the next 5 years. And looking at that 225 number required by the state, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that comes from an average of from 2013 to 2022. And in that 225, affordable housing was calculated. So now what we're saying is that we're going to have, if we gave the 50 to the Downs, they get 60% of all of the permits, not including affordable housing. And we're going to have 245 plus the 100 affordable housing units. So without the affordable housing, we're up 9%, something to consider. With the affordable housing, I didn't do the math on that, but we're up a lot more. I agree that the 50 for the 3I project, which is a great project, but I think it belongs with the 400 for the Downs versus pulling from an affordable housing pool, because the council would have the discretion if they take half of those affordable housing permits then at the council's discretion, you can just replenish it and then we're just adding more. With the 3-bedroom, the caps on the 3 bedrooms, I don't know how GP cog is figuring out, they're 0.3666% of students per 3-bedroom, but there's no difference between a 3-bedroom apartment and a 3-bedroom house in terms of impact. And if anything, I think young families, young people are less inclined to, they might be more attracted to a 3-bedroom apartment because there's no, care outside and that kind of thing. So I would encourage you to keep that to 20%. The other thing you talk, and I'll wrap up quickly, but we talk about a cap on common scheme being at 50%, but in the old growth management ordinance, we just put a cap on the Downs could have 30% of the growth permits in town. And there's no stopping Downs developers, maybe, under a different LLC from jumping to area 1 or area 2 and claiming 50% of the growth permits in those areas. So I would hope that we'd be able to put some, not have some kind of cross pollination between the 3 areas, because otherwise we become a one developer town, and we kind of already are. They already have 60% of the permits. The last thing I'll say is, I think when you started working on this, we were looking at 2 3-year periods versus a single 3-year period. And just listening to the conversation tonight, I think it would be good to maybe make this longer, because you get stuck in the trap of, well, we already have all this stuff in the pipeline. So if anything, we're reacting to what's already out there versus, having a plan and moving forward with it. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment on something not on the agenda? No? All right, with that, I am closing general public comment. Next item is the minutes from the May 17th, 2023 Town Council meeting. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? It's unanimous. All right, next up is item 6, adjustments to the agenda. I'm not aware of any adjustments to the agenda tonight. Item 7 is items to be signed, treasurer's warrants. I signed those right before the workshop. And item number 8 right here. Item number 8 is the town manager report.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'll just address you from the podium, just because I have a bit more substance tonight. So I'll start with my normal overview of ongoing matters, and I'd like to end with a discussion about impact fees and perhaps a proposal about how we can move those forward in a comprehensive way. Since I've started to put down in writing the sort of topics I'll talk about, I always do reserve the right to add to, and I have 2 or 3 items on the end of this I'd like to address as well. First and foremost, with respect to the budget review process, perhaps Finance Chair Clucci will provide some more context. I suspect he will, but the Finance Committee worked very hard. As a committee, they had 4 full review sessions. I believe they had a chance to review all municipal departments as well as the school department. And then they had a 5th meeting last week, which really was the culmination of all that work. And from that, you have before you this evening 2 different amendments. The first I would characterize as being certainly recommended by the Finance Committee, and it's the culmination of all the work done collaboratively with town staff and school staff. The second one really focuses on, as an option, should the council consider it, what it would look like to get to a 3% tax rate increase. And again, I'm certain that those will be introduced and more fully developed at the appropriate time. The final point I'd say about that is myself and staff really appreciated the opportunity to be heard, to have a robust, thorough conversation, and very much appreciate the time and effort everyone put in. With respect to the school building project, I continue to be involved as regards the appraisal. We still haven't finalized the full scope. I expect to see our appraiser's final work and any remaining questions he has. I intend to provide that to the buyers, excuse me, to the seller's appraiser, and hopefully we can get aligned on that. It's really important that both appraisers are set off with the same instructions. If not, we can expect some very different results. So we're spending the time up front. The deadlines are still in place, and at least I can speak from our side. Our appraiser is still in position to provide a final appraisal by the end of June. With respect to Alger Hall, this is a matter I've reported on back in through the years and months. Just last week, we finally did sit down with representatives from the Scarborough Land Trust. They have expressed great interest. I think, as I've reported in the past, they're contemplating a very significant financial investment to make the space suitable for themselves. Some of those improvements involve ADA issues and compliance issues, and so we're still in conversation around whether the town takes on some of those. But there are other improvements they're contemplating really to suit their needs. The next step, I believe, will be to develop, I'll call it a term sheet, but kind of the particulars, and I'll certainly share that through council leadership and then the full council as appropriate. But I would expect within the next month or so, we'll have the real deal points in place that we can share and talk about. With respect to the Ad Hoc Community Center Advisory Committee, today was the so-called soft deadline, I'll say, the deadline for applicants. We've had a brisk interest. I want to appreciate all the work in publicizing that opportunity. Every time we did a blast through the e-newsletter, sure enough, we would see in the ensuing days interested folks putting in their application. I can confidently say that we do have applicants for all positions. I believe the Appointments and Negotiation Committee will be meeting next week. I'm not aware that they'll necessarily have too many choices or decisions to be made about the prescribed members, if you will. But there are certainly some very qualified at-large members, and that will require some level of review and scrutiny. My weekly or bi-weekly update on the Eastern Trail closed the gap. We did have a very productive meeting with CMP. I believe we are back to where we were 2 years ago. Numbers have changed slightly for on-site inspection that they'll insist on, and that we really want. We want their folks on site during some of the critical phases of that project. I should mention as an aside, former planner Jay Chase is now with CMP, was hugely helpful in coordinating the meeting, and I know doing a lot of work behind the scenes to get his colleagues on board and understand the importance of this. So I appreciate his efforts. With regard to the railroad, CSX, they have indicated that they will honor all prior Pan Am commitments, which is not something we've heard so far. So very encouraging news. I think we need to finalize those and document them just to make certain of it. But again, very good indication at this point. The council's aware, and perhaps many in the audience, the Vision Committee, and I should provide a little context. The Vision Committee is a self-entitled or described group. This is a small collection of folks through the Scarborough Community Chamber that really were the impetus for the initial, we call it the All Board Summit back in 2014. And it was really a recognition that a lot of good work is being done, but it's kind of siloed. And let's get everyone together and, cross-pollinate and share ideas. And sure enough, that was very successful in the first year. I can't say that we've consistently done it every year, but we've probably had, this will be perhaps our sixth All Board Summit. And throughout all of this, they've all had kind of a different theme. We did focus on the comprehensive plan for a couple of years in a row. Again, this is a group of folks that you've come to appreciate that are really doing thoughtful, hard work on our behalf, and really are resources that we need to tap. I'm really pleased to say that over the years, we've been able to staff these committees much better than we did historically. And so the work product, I think, is yet again even better because agendas are getting done and minutes are being taken and work's being done in between meetings. So this year's theme will be focusing on council goals. And we really looked at 3 goals that we thought were pertinent for the larger audience, and those being housing and homelessness, transportation and traffic, and sustainability and conservation. And I think, many of you already have a sense of the sort of good work being done in all fronts. So that's the theme, and we're looking for folks, at least a representative from each of the committees, to be in attendance and provide an update to the group as regards how their committees are advancing one or more of those goals. I'll be involved by way of kind of introduction. I believe Chair Anderson will provide an overview of the council goals. And so we look for a productive session. This is scheduled for tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. at the Community Services Hub. And I know we had some conflicts with Ordinance Committee, and I think Councilor McGee will speak to that later on. With respect to a request that we received months ago from the Scarborough Land Trust, there are 3 town properties they've expressed interest in having deeded over for full conservation purposes to the Land Trust. 2 of them are abutting properties on Muzzy Road, and the other property is down here on Route 1. There is a disposition policy in place that requires me to solicit input from various departments and various named boards and committees in town. So I've done that. It's taken a bit longer than I'd hoped. The final one, and the one I really wanted to make sure I had, was from the Parks and Conservation Land Board, who, as you know, does a very thorough analysis for these sorts of considerations. So I do have my input in hand. I do expect this to be on your agenda for your next meeting. The 3 things I just wanted to add to my comments this evening. This is construction season in Maine, so we do have 4 projects, 2 of which are underway and 2 others are in various stages of bidding or consideration. The Spur Road project was opened, the bids were open last week. Pike Industries is the apparent low bidder. Unfortunately, that low bid was about $400,000 higher than budget. So we are trying to understand, looking at unit pricing and understanding where those price escalations are coming. And so at this point, we're doing nothing with that bid. We hope to keep the low bidder kind of on hold as we consider what our options are. The Mitchell Hill Road reconstruction project is in full swing. I believe they're doing tree clearing and some of the culvert work for all the driveways along that area. So the contractor is mobilized and will stay on site to completion. You can't go through town without appreciating the work, the ongoing work at Gorham Road. Again, contractors mobilized and we're on schedule at this point. With respect to Highland Avenue, this is a project, a pedestrian improvement project. We're in final design and completing the final specifications. I've hinted at this in the past, based on other pricing, we expect pricing may be high. I think it makes sense given the amount of time and effort to go to bid and actually see what that is. And we may come back to you and look at combining, resources into doing one of these projects. So just stay tuned in that regard. And the final piece, I know I've communicated to Councilor Hamel. We have been successful in securing additional PAX funding for a paving project, much needed paving project on East Granite Avenue, essentially from Pine Point Road all the way through into Old Orchard. I'm not sure exactly the limits, but it will be an important project. DOT bid that out and it was, again, way over budget, but we were able to secure additional funding, so it will go forward. In the past, I've mentioned that staff has been working with the Crossroads team. They do have a very complicated traffic movement permit that requires them to do significant townwide improvements over a 5-year period. We've completed year 1, we're into year 2, and I've realized, and they have realized that some of the ordering of projects doesn't necessarily make sense. And so we will be driving up to Augusta on Friday to have a conversation with the state traffic engineer about reprioritizing, not changing the projects, just shuffling the order, if you will. And I think there's some merit for at least that conversation, and I'll keep you advised. And lastly, I want to make you aware, some of the councilors that have been here for a bit, the Scarborough Community Chamber has historically done a municipal officials dinner. Sometimes it's been lunch. And so they'd like to do that again this year. They're trying to combine it with 2 other events for efficiency. For their own purposes, they'll be doing their annual meeting, but they'd like, and you'll get an invite to do a municipal officials dinner. And I've been asked to do my state of the town report, which is a an annual tradition. It's typically done in the morning, but we're going to try to do it all at once. So at this point, they've focused on Wednesday, June 28 at 5:30 at the Throttle Club. Again, you'll get a formal invitation, but that's hot off the press, and I want to make sure you had that on your schedules. So with that, I'd like to transition into a fairly high level conversation around impact fees. And thank you, Liam. If you could just put up the first slide and leave it there for a moment. This is an item that has been talked about on and off for very good reason. It's a really important, I'll call it an arrow in our quiver of growth management. And Scarborough has a long tradition in history of impact fees. Just by way of history, the state first enabled municipalities to impose impact fees on development back in 1987. And by my research, the earliest one I could find in Scarborough was in 1990. So we didn't wait long. And those are focused around traffic improvements along the Payne Road corridor in the first instance. And then through the years, we've adopted and developed other fees, many different traffic related fees, a school impact fee in the early 2000s. And so I think we've got a long tradition. Unfortunately, some of them are so old and they're a bit outdated. And frankly, the rationale is long gone in some respects. And so it's certainly high time for that reason alone to look back at our impact fees, make sure we're charging for the right things and we're charging the right amounts, frankly. And again, not the least, the other impetus for this would be this ongoing interest and discussion around managing growth. I think this is a real important component of that. So for Scarborough's purposes, we manage them and state law requires it through ordinance, and they're contained in two different areas, chapter 10, 410 and 415. I think as part of this, I'd like to clean that up so they're all contained in one location. I think it's just for ease of everyone, frankly. So I have prepared a bit of I'll call it a technical memorandum. It's not terribly in depth. It provides, I think, some salient points. It also provides a copy of the state law, which is only about a page and a half, remarkably brief. And then there's a guidance document. You'll note that it's dated 2003. Not much has changed, frankly, and I think there's still some very pertinent and valuable guidance pieces there. And so I've provided that with you as well. So Lee, if you go to the next slide, I wanted to start on just kind of framing this. The state law is very clear in terms of the different areas that we're allowed to even consider imposing impact fees. So you see this list: wastewater collection and treatment facilities, municipal water facilities, solid waste facilities, public safety equipment and facilities, roads and traffic control devices, parks and other open space or recreation areas, and school facilities. Now, in my opinion at this point, I think items 4 through 7 are the most applicable and have been at least the focus of consideration so far. We're just not in the business of wastewater, at least directly, or water, or thankfully solid waste. So I really don't see those applying whatsoever. So I really have focused and will continue to focus on those bottom 4, if you will. Yeah, next, please. So I guess I'm going to jump right into it with this slide. Before I do that, we can keep this up, Liam, that's fine. The state law also goes on and provides some other guidance. As I mentioned earlier, we must do this by ordinance. So that's just the instrument through which the council must adopt impact fees. The fee must be reasonably related to the development's share of the costs of the improvement. We must segregate funds that we collect as impact fees, and they are very restricted in their use. We can't use them for anything other than what we collected them for. We also must establish a reasonable schedule for use, and it makes reference to a capital improvement plan or your comprehensive plan as kind of the backdrop to that schedule. And then we must also devise a mechanism to refund fees to the extent that we collect more fees than we need to do the project. or they're not spent according to the schedule that we've established for ourselves. So those are essential parts, and they would be components of the ordinance as well. So with respect to Scarborough, we see there's a number of very good things that are underway. Obviously, we've had detailed work regarding our school needs, and we've got a project proposal with cost estimates that are being refined as we speak. So I think we've got very good rationale justification to upgrade and replace our current school impact fee, which is based on a Department of Education submission that's long gone. I think the only project that still pertains, I'm not even sure if there's any that pertain. So it's high time that we do replace it. And I think we've got ample rationale and support to move forward with the project as is currently scoped. With regard to traffic, we're really going to focus, no surprise, on the Route 1 and Payne Road corridors. That's kind of where we started, and that's still where the majority of our traffic is traveling. That's not to say it will be exclusive to that, but those are the major corridors that we'll focus on. With respect to Parks and Recreation, of course, we have a new Parks and Facilities Master Plan, which is a perfect vehicle to look at. It's just a treasure trove of information and detail that I think can be used in any number of ways to help support a robust Parks and Facilities, Parks and Recreation fee. In terms of open space, assuming the council permits, we hope to be undertaking an open space and conservation plan this year. And when complete, we expect that would serve. In fact, we'll make sure that the scope of work for that work is sufficient to help support the implementation of an impact fee. Similarly, we are just on the doorstep of starting a transportation master plan that's going to help inform some further, well, I think it will indicate, I don't know if it will directly inform and be all the rationale needed to support other fees, but I think it will be very helpful in identifying additional need. And then in the area of public safety, I say worth exploring. Obviously, we have made a massive investment next door. That facility is nearly twice the size of our prior facilities. So I think there's a very strong argument that can be made that that was at least in part built the way it was and the size it was to accommodate for future growth. Again, the biggest piece to keep in mind is that we need to have a rationale or a articulable basis for the fee, that it can't be arbitrary, that it's got to really be based in fact. And perhaps to make it the easiest example would be we identify a failing intersection. We actually go so far as to design the intersection, have a cost estimate to build it out to satisfy the failing condition. And then we prescribe a per trip fee to development. So there's a lot of pieces to that. That's probably the easiest one to explain. There's other methodologies that will be used depending on the other fee types. Next, please, Liam. And this is an overview with more detail than I just covered, but the different colors indicate kind of the different categories or subject areas. We've tried to layer in here when we expect we can move these forward. And there's 3 on this page and the next that we think we can advance in front of you by this fall. The first would be the school impact fee. I think we essentially have almost all the ingredients, but for maybe a final refined number. But we certainly have the project defined. The Parks and Recreation fee, I think needs to wait. That's another one we can advance this fall. I think we have all the ingredients in place. And I know Todd Souza and others have started the work to understand how we advance that, but we expect we can do that late summer, early fall. The open space fee is something we absolutely should be looking at. I think the plan will be the real vehicle and the rationale that we need to wait for. The blue area is really all traffic transportation related. So we do have an Oak Hill mitigation fee. It's called a mitigation fee for a reason, that there's no fixed Oak Hill, basically. There's no magical design that's going to make the failing situation go away. It is what it is. And so this is not technically an impact fee, it's a mitigation fee, and we expect and would intend to continue charging that as such. And we'll certainly consult with legal to assure that we would look to continue that as it is. A number of these other fees, there were a total of 5 different districts along Payne Road. They'll be discontinued really as part of the TMP work. The Downs is being directed to do many of the projects contemplated in those. And we're also providing some of the impact fees that we've collected over the years toward that effort. But there's other opportunities along that corridor that we do look to advance. So you'll see Payne Road District 1, that will be closed again in coordination with the work done as part of the Downs traffic movement permit. Payne Road District 2, we look to continue. This is particularly at the Payne and Gorham Road intersection. It's an area that still needs attention, and we expect to get that in place. You go to the next page, please. District 3, this is an area we look to continue. The 2 projects, and these would be new projects, but in that District 3 area, I think we've heard in the past, residents from this podium have talked about some limitations on Payne Road. The biggest one being the narrowing down at the bridge crossing at the Nonsuch, and that's a limiting factor. So that's a defined project. That's something we can cost estimate, and that's something that we look to advance as soon as this fall. The other one is a future signal that would go at the intersection of Ginn Road and Payne Road. If you can picture where the Irving is, there's a credit union proposed on that site. They'll be producing a design and a cost estimate, and with that, we believe we can use that information to impose a fee to ensure that we collect funds and are able to build that out in the future. Payne Road District 4 has been closed, and we don't propose anything different there. And then North Scarborough will be closed again as part of the TMP work. We will keep in place Dunstan Corner and Higas Parkway. These are 2 projects that the town actually undertook itself, spent the money, built it out, and we're paying our debt with impact fees that we collect. And so to the extent that that debt exists, and it does, we expect to continue imposing that fee and collecting those funds. And then in terms of additional impact fees, I expect there will be more. I think, again, the transportation plan is likely to give us better indicators. And so I would kind of characterize those as kind of a second phase. And that's generally true of road and traffic controls. And we may be able to advance something sooner in public safety equipment and facilities. I just haven't spent enough time thinking about that. But I think that's an area that, given the fact that we've made the investment in Central Station, that we may be able to advance further. So I guess the piece I want to leave you with, I think we can make some fairly notable gains this calendar year, and we will. And then over about an 18-month period, I think we can look at replacing comprehensively, kind of top to bottom, a whole suite of new fees that are justified with more recent work. And again, I think this is an opportune time to be having this conversation and to stay on task with advancing the implementation. And it's all about building that rationale and being able to articulate and support why we're doing it. I guess the final piece I would just mention, it's not intuitive, and I suspect we need to do a bit more work on this. All fees don't apply equally, and by that I mean some fees will be applied in the residential sense. School impact fees, for instance, apply to residential only, whereas many of the others, I need to do a bit more work on recreation, open space, and those sorts of things. It strikes me that could be applicable across all types of development, but each of those ordinances will be very clear and specific as to which type of development it intends to address. The final piece I'll just say as we work through this is there's some cautionary notes that I think we should be mindful of. This mechanism cannot be used to slow growth. That's not its purpose. It's intended expressly to make sure that new development is paying its fair share, so to speak. On the residential front, I do have a fear that increased fees will affect affordability. Roughly speaking, for a single family home in Scarborough right now, and it's been true for some time, it's about $10,000 in impact fees that are paid. And rest assured, that goes right to the buyer. So, so affordability, I think, is, there's a balance to be struck here. There's a potential that we could stifle growth, and we've come accustomed, and I think we appreciate a level of growth to help fund our causes. And I just want to be mindful that though it may not be intended, it may have a chilling effect and stifle growth to the point that it presents some other challenges for us. And the last thing I'll say, I would expect that there'll be some sort of differential rates in some of these, particularly on school impact fees. And there may be some unintended consequences of incentivizing one type over another because of the differential rate structure, multifamily over single family perhaps. So those are sorts of things that are swimming around in my mind, and I want to be mindful of as we consider all of these fees. I think there's an important purpose to be served, but I think we need to be thoughtful. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions on this topic or any other.
Are there any questions for Tom? Councilor Hamel?
Tom, do you have a figure for us what the total balance is today of impact fees for the town?
Sorry, I can't recite that off the top of my head. I can certainly provide that to you. Sure.
Because I think I would be interested to know sort of what the flow of funds are from those fees, and you know how we book them and how we track the balances over time. So you know, this is a great start. I'm looking forward to learning more about it, and you know, it's interesting to see that
Mhm.
the uses are quite specific and you know, limited or let's say focused. So, but thank
Yeah.
you. Nice start.
Yeah, in terms of we track them, they are shown, I believe, in exhibits B1 and B2 in all of our financial audits, and they do appear as part of our restricted fund balance.
Any other questions for Tom? I just have one question, Tom.
Please.
So I know also in the budget this year, I think it's coming forward as a recommendation to fund a vulnerability assessment.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious how climate change and those types of things may flow into this. Some of those may be traffic improvements that we may have to make.
Fair
potentially,
point.
But I think of like, specifically, I think it's Higgins Beach where we're often emailed by a resident there concerned about the weather and how it's putting some risk to, I think, some
Mhm.
sewage treatment infrastructure down there. And so I'm just curious, because I would assume growth and climate change also have some impact to the community. And I don't know if that's a different qualified use that's not allowed by the state that we may want to.
Yeah, sustainability and climate change is not a contemplated category. That's not to say, I think your example of infrastructure, we know Route 1 needs to be elevated at some great expense. So I think there's some obvious areas there. I think that's an area worth considering further for sure.
Okay, maybe somewhere in the 18 to 24 month range. or
I
something.
think so,
Because
yeah.
There's enough work to do.
Yes,
All right. All right, thank you, Tom.
thank you.
All right. Moving on to order number 23-025, 7 PM public hearing and action on the following request for a food handler's license from Joanna Russell, Norumbega Provisions located at 15 Holly Street, Suite 106. This is being brought forward by the town clerk, and this was something that the council tabled from our May 4th, 2023 town council meeting. I don't know, Tody or Tom, if you guys want to, or Liam, want to set it up?
Sure. So this was a license that was originally brought forward. It was a bit conflated with a marijuana operation. But we have gone through the process to mitigate the concerns we had around a non-marijuana operational capacity. And we're confident that they're able to undertake a business model that does not include manufacturing of marijuana products at this time.
Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? Oh. All right, Ms. Russell, we see you have your hand up and we are letting you in. So if you unmute your phone, you should be able to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Joanna Russell, obviously the licensee applying for the food handler's license. I made the mistake of not attending a previous meeting and wanted to make sure to be here in case there were any questions. I believe that we've handled any questions to this point and satisfied any requirements everybody on town council should at this point know what we're doing, not doing, hope to do, and promise not to do until further licensing is acquired. And I just wanted to make my presence known in case there was any question. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this item? No, with that, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second,
All right, any discussion?
I had a request, Mr. Chair, would it be possible for you to, explain the consent agreement, or perhaps, Liam could do that for us, because I know that was an outstanding item that has been completed, which appears to be, facilitating approval this evening.
Happy to. So part of the question when this originally came forward was this was an establishment that a portion of their business was a marijuana manufacturing component. And so the questions came forward to the applicant as they were not properly licensed for marijuana manufacturing. What is the nature of their business that doesn't include that? Again, that's fairly unique because the vast majority of businesses that manufacture marijuana products, that's the entirety of their business. And I think the council was appropriately concerned with not granting a food handler's license for an operation that they're not otherwise licensed to operate in. So the consent agreement did account for that. It did require the food handler's license applicant to explicitly disclose that they would not be manufacturing marijuana products during the interim until they're duly licensed. And they did agree to voluntary and random inspections up to and including testing of their products to ensure there's no THC products being manufactured on site.
And I did one quick follow-up question, and that is, how will the current moratorium affect approval and, the operation, of this particular activity?
So with a food handler's license, they can, if approved, they can operate again and manufacture any non-THC or marijuana products. They would not be eligible to manufacture any marijuana products until the existing emergency moratorium has lapsed, which I believe is the middle of August, tentatively. At that time, they can, presuming there's no extension of the moratorium or no other prohibition or change in zoning, they could come forward, and I expect they plan to, with a license for a marijuana establishment.
Thank you.
Any other discussion items?
So I'm sorry,
So
are they currently, they're saying they're going to be operating and not using cannabis infused?
Mhm.
Okay, and so I think just generally, I'm confused when I go to their website. I do not see any products that are non-cannabis. And I think that's just more of a general comment. It's a little confusing to me.
They do manufacture hemp products. They manufacture CBD products, and they do a lot of contract work, which wouldn't be public facing. And so there is a large component of their business that has nothing to do with THC products.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion items? No, I just want to acknowledge Miss Russell, who I know this was a new process for her. And I think since has gotten very engaged and involved. I think she's gone to many ordinance meetings. I'm not sure if she's gone to the marijuana committee that was established, but I know she'd offered to. So I mean, I think this is, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate that she's worked with the town and learned from the mistake, had the consent agreement, followed through with it. So I'm very happy to support this tonight and keep her business moving. All right, so with that, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-051, 7 PM public hearing and action on the renewal request for a special amusement permit from the following business, Bailey's Campground, located at 275 Pine Point Road. Again, this was an item that was tabled from our May 17th, 2023 town council meeting as we were awaiting more information from the applicant. And I believe they're here in the audience tonight to answer any questions that the council may have. But before we go to them, I don't know, Tody, if there's anything you'd like to add.
No, as the packet notes, we did receive an email from the general manager, and also were supplied a updated application requested. and they are not seeking an exemption for Good Neighbors Ordinance either.
All right. So with that, are there any questions for Tody before I open it up to public comment? No? Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item, or if the business owner would like to come up, if there's anything you would like to say or any questions that the council may have for them? And if you could just state your name and address for the record.
Yep. Galen Bailey, General Manager of Bailey's Camping Resort, 275 Pine Point Road. Good evening, council. Apologize that I missed the meeting before. That was a very big mix-up to get updates to you guys. I hope you all were able to read the email, see the picture of the updates. We've invested a good amount of money into the project of sound mitigation. It was supposed to happen last year. We ordered all of this in December of 2021. And with supply chain issues coming out of Texas, with Main Bay Canvas, they didn't receive the materials until September of 2022, which the summer was over with by then. They had it manufactured, but they said, I said it's worthless at that point. So they did it this past April and fully installed. And by all tests so far, things seem to be very positive with the sound outcome.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Bailey? Councilor Hamel?
Yes, thanks, Balin, for your update. I did notice that you submitted a revised application, and your original application, I think you were just looking for for approval for Saturday, and your new application is requesting all 7 days of the week that you'd be able to use amplified equipment, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Sunday through Friday, and 7:30 to 9 p.m. Saturday. So could you explain the reason for moving from just doing it 1 day a week to all every day?
I think it was more of a misunderstanding of reading what was to be described on the application. I provided that information in an email last year, just saying that we do have entertainment 7 days a week. It can tend to be amplified depending on, we have rotating entertainment different nights of the week. It's not necessarily the same thing each week. Karaoke, for example. But then we have a music bingo, which is a very low key thing. Most of the entertainment does not even have a chance to get projected outside of that entertainment area. It's really the live music that's the key issue that we've been dealing with over the last few years on the Saturday evenings. So after getting email back from Tody, I reread everything and got the application updated. We have been doing these 7 days a week for 15 plus years now. But the entertainment piece has also been up at that area since 2001.
Thanks. Any other questions for Mr. Bailey? All right, thank you, Mr. Bailey.
All right, thank you.
Is there anybody else in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Councilor Hamel?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that I sent an email to a couple of the neighbors who had originally made complaints most recently, about the noise. I've not heard back from them. But based upon what, kind of what we have, I don't really have any basis to, to deny the request, for this to be approved. And then I think we just go from there and see how things work this summer. So, but I want to thank everyone involved, and I particularly the efforts of Mr. Bailey. And he's been in operation there many years. So appreciate the investment he's made to try and mitigate, to be sensitive to neighbors' concerns.
Any other discussion? No? Okay, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-052, public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the zoning ordinance, section 7C, residential density and affordable housing provisions B, affordable housing in lieu fee. And this was brought forward by the Housing Alliance. And again, just simply, this was allowing for a payment mechanism to help us pay for the Safe in Maine pledge that we made, which was for $50,000. And today, you know, the way it's written didn't allow for that. And with some simple striking language, we're able to use this fund to pay those, which is a fund that's billed by development. And so it's not Scarborough taxpayer money, it's the developers that have contributing to the fund. So with that, I'm going to open it up for public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience or online who'd like to comment on this item? All right, I'm seeing nobody. So with that, because it's a second reading, can I get a motion?
Second?
Any discussion? Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, I think this is a great solution to, you know, using those funds. As you folks know, I was very much in support of, you know, doing this. Just as an aside, I got a phone call from a gentleman this week, as a matter of fact, all worried that, you know, we're helping those people, the asylum seekers over, you know, people who live on the streets of Portland, so to speak. I had a great conversation with him. And when I explained that, you know, how the funding mechanism, we were hoping to have it work, he was like, oh, you're not using the taxpayer money? And I said, no, it's coming from a fund from developers. And that he had a whole different tune after that, so. Just thought I'd pass that along.
All right, any other discussion on this item? No? All right, oh, Counselor McGee?
I do want to say that at first I was kind of hesitant, right? Because we're collecting this money from developers in Scarborough and you want to see it utilized in Scarborough. But I think when you take the broader view of this, it is important to understand that this problem is actually becoming regional. And if we don't have the facilities here or the wherewithal to try to deal with it at this stage, this is probably the right thing to do, is help another community who is built to handle some of this, fund some of that project. So I just want to say that it's a, you know, it doesn't, on its surface, I think Jean Marie alluded to it, on the surface, it doesn't seem right, but at the same time, when you look at the overall picture of what we're trying to accomplish, I think it is a good move for us, so.
Yeah. And I just concur with that from the perspective of, you know, when we set our council goals, when it comes to dealing with housing choice and homelessness, we made a deliberate focus that we want to support outside agencies or outside parties who are probably better equipped than we are to solve problems that aren't unique to us or things that, you know, are really only Scarborough. And so this is just an opportunity to play a little bit of a part with a bigger challenge within the region. And I think that, you know, as we talk about our goal and as we revisit it, I think continuing that conversation of how do we leverage these other agencies that are out there trying to do this on our behalf, and how do we find ways to finance those projects that can have probably a better outcome and impact rather than us trying to do something alone within the community. Any other discussion on this item?
Just a point of clarification, there's not an expressed, so far there has not been expressed authorization from the council because you haven't been able to. Would you expect for me to come back in 2 weeks with that, or okay, I was wondering whether there was sufficient understanding of the expectation that I could move forward with fulfilling the pledge, but I'll be back in 2 weeks.
All right.
No, I'll be back in 2 weeks.
Tom, as long as that doesn't delay or
No.
create a
that's fine.
setback, that's fine.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good process.
All right, calling the vote. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Next is order number 23-056, 7 PM public hearing and action on the following new requests for a food handler's license and liquor license from Alfredo Salgado, 1800 Mexican restaurant located at 183 US Route 1. This is formerly Tequila Mexican Cantina restaurant, new ownership. And this is and for a food handler's license from John Bondelio, a French picnic catering located at 15 Holly Street, units 103. These are brought forward by the town clerk. Cody?
These are new applications as noted, and the requirement of the ordinance is that they come before the council for approval. We vetted the applications and we recommend approval.
Great. Are there any questions for Tody? No, is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No, so with that, I'm closing public comment. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? No, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Next is order number 23-057, 7 PM public hearing and action on the following new requests for combined massage establishment, massage therapist license from Stephanie Washburn, heel massage and therapy located at 51 US Route 1, Suite 5, and for a massage therapist license for Cynthia Kerr, Michaela Martin, Kaylee Lippencolt, and Kimberly Harder, working at Heel Massage and Therapy. And these are being brought forward by the town clerk.
As noted in the previous order, these are first-time applications which are required to come before the council for approval. These applications also have been vetted and recommended.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? Can I get a motion?
So move.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Next is resolution 23-003. Act on the request to approve resolution 23-003 in support of the concept of 30 by 30 campaign to protect and conserve at least 30% of land and water by 2030. So this was being brought forward from a workshop that we had from the Conservation Commission. You guys set the stage, and if
Here, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think as we know, one of the council goals is to conserve and try to do 30 by 30. And so inevitably, the Conservation Commission took on one of that goals very quickly. And they showed up and we were able to have a great, I think, very productive workshop actually in April on conservation. And they presented this resolution. I think this is a great resolution. I think this reflects very well on our town to say that we take conservation seriously and that we're willing to give our efforts to it. We realize it's a bold goal, but I think it's something that we have, and we also have a lot of residents behind who want to work towards this goal. And part of this resolution is the proposal of an ad hoc open space committee to further reach the 30 by 30 goal.
Right, and I don't know if we want to call it open space, but whatever we want to call it. I support this particularly as written for all the reasons Karen mentioned, because I'm a firm believer that, you know, when you set out and on a car trip and you don't have a map, you're going to end up anywhere. So when you set a goal, even though it's an ambitious goal, like this, it's aspirational in many ways, but that being said, it at least gives you something to aim for as a council. I was happy to work with Karen. We had a great meeting, the two of us together. We met with the committee, you know, worked through the verbiage. The next step, I was originally thinking, you know, get something going July 1st, but you know, life intervenes and summer's here. I mean, it just is. But I'm thinking if we shoot for like beginning of September, looking at some sort of an ad hoc committee that, and I'm looking at my phone here, it would be time limited, action specific to determine exactly who shall drive any efforts and outline what action should be taken regarding this goal. Our thoughts on committee composition would be one counselor, one person from Scarborough Land Trust, one from Conservation Committee, one Land Acquisition Board person, one Community Service, Services Advisory Board person, one person from LRPC, one Shellfish Coastal Waters member, one Friends of the Marsh, and one Scarborough Fish and Game. And I know people look at me and they go, Scarborough Fish and Game. And I'm like, yeah, do you know how much land they've got conserved over there? And bring together a whole variety of different players and see what sort of plan they can come up with and what they think we should do. But keep it like 6 month, time limited and very focused. So anyway, I'm hopeful that all of you will support the resolution tonight and then we'll move on from there.
Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this? No? All right. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Discussion? Councillor McGee?
Yes, just real quick, perhaps Karen or Jean Marie, either of you might know, but do you know how close we are? Like, are we Are we at 20% in the town? Are we, like, how far away from that 30% of conservation are we?
17. I was gonna say
So-
16, so
so we-
17.
We need 17% more, we need 13% more.
We are at
we are at
17.
17.
Okay, so we want 13% more conservation in town. How many acres does that equal roughly?
We did the math at the workshop, right?
Yeah.
I just can't, my
Yeah,
memory is
those
not,
are all good questions.
that's right,
Yeah.
we were on a cruise.
And if I could
Yeah,
add,
you were on your cruise, so you missed all the
Yeah.
details. Yeah.
if I could
Yeah.
add something,
Mhm.
I mean, those are all good questions. I also feel very strongly that there's some conserved lands that weren't captured yet or haven't been totally captured in the numbers. So that's part of why I want to have, a very limited group of folks who are involved in this say, this is what we've got. This is where we think we can head. This is where we think we can maybe make some more difference. Like, for example, there was a whole time period in the 90s out on my side of town, your side of town too, where a lot of open space was deeded as a result of this development that was so-called cluster development. It'd be interesting to look at some of the deeds to see, can they be fixed or do they need to be fixed to remain, conserved forever, those types of things. So
Mhm.
if that helps.
Yeah, like conservation subdivisions and things. like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you have just a rough idea of how many acres we might be talking?
So
I'm looking.
the amount of that we need to cover to reach this goal based on the 17% would be 4,000 acres. And again, I think this is where the open space plan
Yeah.
will help us identify where all those pieces are. And it may be different strategies or tactics, not necessarily all purchasing that land by the town, but it could be, like you mentioned, some other actions that could happen that could incentivize people to commit to conservation. That some of that may be low hanging fruit that we may quickly cover. 4,000, did I say that right? Okay.
So I guess just to wrap it up I would just say I'm very supportive of the conservation effort. I think that's a really incredibly aggressive goal to
Yes.
acquire 4,000 acres in 7 years. But I am supportive of conservation efforts, and maybe there's some benchmarks that could be established by this group as they go along to help us along the way.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Counselor
I'm
Hammond?
of a similar mind here. I mean, I had this conversation with Counselor Shoup and I think this is and also with Randy, and I think this is a great goal, maybe more aspirational, so we want to make sure that if we're committing to it and we can't really get to 30 because of how much we've already developed or whatever, then I think our efforts to get as close to that as possible or exceed it if that's possible, I think is very well placed and a noble and worthy goal. So, but I just want to make sure that I know this is a big global and a lot of initiative that people are signing up for. I just want to make sure that we're helping to moderate expectations a little bit. So if we have to count the water or something like that in order to hit the number that we,
Mhm.
we're all
Yeah.
playing by the same set of rules, but
Yep.
nice work.
A lot of ponds.
Any other discussion, Counselor Scyther?
I think this is fantastic. I think bringing all of these people together who have a passion for this, who have energy for this is such a great idea. I hope that the citizens and the residents in the town that this matters to, that us agreeing and supporting, hopefully this resolution sends a signal to them that we're listening, but also, lights a fire under them too, that this is a big goal and that there's a lot of work to do here. And so I just really look forward to what the committee is able to produce. And I think that this is just fantastic, step in the right direction for us.
And I'll just add what Tom mentioned in his town manager report about the all committee or all board meeting and all the committee members you just listed. I think this is timely for us to bring to that conversation tomorrow to say, this is a big goal. It's important to the town. It's important to the council. Those are the right people, I think, to kind of start the conversation with, to formalize, because I think those are the same people that we want to be on that short-term
And I'm
committee.
coming tomorrow night,
Good.
so I can schmooze.
Yes, you can schmooze, you can recruit, you can get people going, but yeah, again, I think it's important that we do this, and I think it's important. It's okay to set stretch goals, and again, I think we can make as much progress to this as we can, and if we hit the exact number by 2030, amazing, but if we can make significant progress between closing the gap we have, I think that's also great, and so, but we won't know until we try, and I think this is kind of a first step to kind of get some energy behind this and move it forward. So I'm excited to support it tonight. All right. Any other discussion items? No? All right, with that, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All right, next up is order number 23-043, second reading on the proposed 2024 municipal school budget. This is being brought forward by the town manager, superintendent of schools, and the finance committee. So I'm going to ask Counselor Clucci if you want to or Tom, if you want to kind of key us off, and then Counselor Clucci, come to you.
Just a couple of introductory comments if I could. During my report, I think I covered the process that the finance committee has undertaken in terms of starting with our proposed budget, kind of going through a very deliberate process and coming forward with a set of very clear, discrete recommendations and adjustments, and those are contained in Amendment 1. I just, as I reflect back, I want to make sure that we all take stock in the fact that I think this is a document that we should all be proud of. We've done, finally, it seems, we're poised to do things that we've talked about in some cases for a decade. Out of the gate, I think I was more aggressive in funding capital without bonding items, doing it through other means, those being by appropriation, by using appropriate reserve accounts, or maximizing opportunities with TIF funds. I've never seen more of a consistent conversation and focus on fund balance and preservation the same. That was really welcomed, and I hope this is here to stay. And I think that value rings true. This is a conservative budget in some respects. The worst case is we're going to produce more fund balance, and that's not a bad thing. And I guess the final piece I'd say is this is all done, delivering a budget, at least including the First Amendment, less than 4%, done at a time with some of the record high inflationary pressures that we're certainly not immune from. So really feeling good about where we started, more importantly, where we ended. Appreciate everyone's hard work.
So, yeah, I got to spend a lot of quality time with staff and Karen and Don, and it was a really professional review. I was impressed with what was brought forward and how it was conveyed to us. I think the priorities were articulated very well and clearly. I think what was requested is what's needed. It doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of things that were moving around. My inclination or my sense is that it's a conservative budget and that we asked to fully fund positions that we're probably not going to fill in the next year. So, and that's okay. That's conservative, right? So if that money isn't spent, it goes into fund balance. As a council, we set a couple of goals. We set 3 goals actually, going into the year that related to finances. One of them has been longstanding. It's been a mill rate target to get close to 3% is the way we phrased it this year. We're closer to 4% if we accept the recommendation from the finance committee. But there were 2 other goals that I think are important to recognize as well. One of them, we know that our debt service has been going down, and what I was guarding against was I want to make sure we don't start spending that on people and things that are going to be requiring funding each year. So we set a target of having taxpayer-funded debt service and capital items at about almost 16 million, 15.9 million. If I add up, we do have funds going directly to fund balance. 1.3 million is going directly to increase fund balance, and that's coming from the Higas Parkway TIF. We have a couple of capital items that we never would have funded an $825,000 CAD system without issuing bonds, but we're paying for that through the downtown TIF this year. We also have some code and permitting software going through the downtown TIF. We appropriated 2.3 million, which is very much on the high side for capital. We're typically in the 1 to 1.5 million range. School buses, we're funding them from reserves. If this amendment or if the first amendment is approved, we're no longer issuing bonds for those. We are adding, this is another addition to fund balance. We have a rescue reserve that the first 1.2 million that we collect is going to go to the taxpayer, but anything over that is going to go to a reserve fund. It's probably going to be a couple $100,000. So anyways, when I add these things up, we're about 15.6 million versus our target of 15.9. That's right. I'm going to call it even. That's right where we want to be. The other goal that we set was no more than a 5% gross budget increase. And this one we knocked out of the park. We set a target in our goals of a gross budget appropriation of 121.9 million. And if you accept our recommended amendment will be at 114.7 million. So we're well under what was appropriated last year. Now, there's a bit of a mismatch between those numbers. If I put them on the same basis as last year, where all the same things are contributing to the gross budget appropriation, it's an increase of 0.25%. So again, well under our gross budget target. So that's kind of a summary. We haven't put this on the floor yet, but what we as a finance committee determined to do is bring forward two amendments for the council to consider. One is going to be to get you to what I just said. And then the other one, if the 3% is important to the council, we have a pathway to get there, and it requires additional cuts to budgets. So that's it for introductions, and when we get to it, I'll introduce the amendments.
Great. Are there any questions for Tom or John?
Yeah, I just, one quick comment and one question. I would agree with the comments that have been made in terms of how much we accomplished this year. And I think we've really gone farther than ever in several areas in terms of, not only the detail and the granularity of the discussions, but, also how thorough I think everybody was in terms of preparing the budgets and trying to convey the needs and the things that have happened since COVID that are kind of putting us in this position where we want to continue to maintain services, but at the same time, really begin to take a harder and harder look at things that are, that are fixed, semi-fixed costs, especially staff levels, and things that are, equipment and facilities and things like that, may not be necessary, or software programs or what have you, that could be deferred or delayed or approached differently, without purchasing them without using debt to do so, that sort of thing. So I think there are a bunch of things that happened that were really positive. The thing I will say though is that I think that I'm in favor of us, supporting both of the measures so that we actually get a 3 in the target number that we set. We set a number of as close to 3% increase in the mill rate, and I think if we approve everything that's before us this evening, it will be actually 3.97%, which is, because it's really closer to 4 than 3. So there's that. I think the other issue is when we talk about mill rate increases, we don't really talk about consistently gross and net budget figures. And I think if you look at those figures, the figure associated with a 3.9% mill rate increase would be something like 7.7% increase in a net budget. John, help me with that. But it's a set, I think it's like a 7. So when we're saying we're really not keeping pace with inflation, actually, that figure is higher than the employment cost index and the CPI, that's tracking higher than the inflation rates of the past 12 months. So we're, it's not really an austerity budget. It's I think it's a respectable budget, probably an acceptable budget, but not, I think we have more work to do, particularly in view of what's coming forward in terms of potential investments involving additional debt.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? Right, I am not seeing anybody. So with that, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? So this is the motion on the main budget. So now Councilor Clucci. I'm
Yeah,
assuming you
I'd
wanna-
like to offer an amendment that was included in the packet. And it's titled Amendment 1, which goes through and tabulates all the changes that were made as a result of both the school board and the town council's finance committee review. Oh, okay, and it's up on the screen. So there's not a lot of, well, the changes are highlighted in red. A lot of the changes are detailed in supporting documents that that show what's going in and out of appropriations to bonding, or in and out of certain line items. We shifted some things for, really a transition to use reserve accounts, where it made sense. This is the recommendation from the finance committee. The first one, we were pretty well in agreement on this one. And I think it's pretty traditional for the council to accept this first one. So I'll offer that up as an amendment. And we'll see, and then we'll take it from there.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All right, any discussion on the amendment? Counselor Shupe?
Being on finance was a very educational experience for me, and I actually ended up enjoying it. I just had a couple comments generally. I mean, it was a great process to go through, and I realized that council consistently has had a goal over the years. Is it correct to say that the last 3 years, your goal has been to be a 3% mill rate? And so you guys have failed because you've been at 1%. And you've been at 1%, and then you've been at 2%. So we haven't met our goal in a way. And I don't know if it was a goal to keep it under 3% or to be as close to 3% as possible. But I do feel like when I look back, going back, we were at 1%, 2.4 the mill rate. And so now we're looking at 3.96. And I have to wonder, is it because we were at 1%, 2.5 for the mill rate? I think it's a goal. I think we also need to think about our town and how we're expanding and growing, and that we have needs that have to be met. I'm a little uncomfortable with, some of the cuts that have to be made, but I realize that that's just how it goes. But again, I think one of the other factors that I learned is that, we're sitting here tonight and we're saying 3.96%, but that is a guess. And consistently, we've come in as a council, I understand, previously high, and we want to be high, and then the assessor comes in and says, guess what, we got more money, and it's not actually this, it's that. And so I would really hope that that's something that people will keep in mind, is that we're talking about 3.96% tonight. We're hoping that it'll go down. I almost feel like we can assume it'll go down at least a little bit, and that we've also kept it pretty substantially below the 3% floor. And so I don't think this proposal is inappropriate. And I hope everyone supports it.
Any other discussion?
Just a point of clarification. I appreciate the comments that my counterpart on the finance committee, Councilor Shupe, has said. Actually, this is the first year that we changed the wording on the target. We said as close, the target would be as close to 3% as possible. That's the exact wording. Prior years, it was less than 3%. So when we got a number that was less than 3%, I think the lesser than it was, versus 3% was actually, considered exceeding the goal, not meeting it because it didn't come in at 3.
Great. Any other discussions on the amendment? Counselor Seifert?
I just want to say thank you to the finance committee for their due diligence and for the amount of time, and Karen, the amount of learning and the good questions. And I watched all of the meetings, and I will say I very much missed being on finance this year. But I also did not miss as many baseball games. And so it was a fair trade maybe. But I will say that I know that when you hear from each of our department heads who are just the best of the best, and they represent their department, and they represent the needs of this town, and they represent the needs of our students, and they do so with so much passion, but not just that, with a wealth of information. And they are presenting a budget that meets the needs, but also something that they are professionally proud of. I'm always floored by that year after year, no matter how many times I participate in this process. And so I want to thank all of our professional staff for the amount of work that goes into developing and presenting a budget to us. I fully support the amendment as presented. I am with Karen in the sense that in the past we have come in well under 3%. And so if it's semantics, whether we missed the goal or exceeded the goal, I'll leave that to Dawn. But we have done exceedingly well at coming in under 3%. And in the past, I have been on committees, both on the school side and the town side, where we have really grind it out until the 11th hour to try and make sure that we hit that one particular goal, only to have the town valuation come in and help us out at the last minute and to really be well under that mill rate goal. I don't think that anyone in town has been shocked or surprised by their tax bill, which I feel like is our responsibility. We set the expectation and we deliver on what we have said. That being said, given the inflationary situation that we are in, given the fact that that impacts our town and school budget just as much as it does our grocery bill and our gas bill, I think that I'm okay with a little bit of a stretch this year. And so I remain optimistic that the valuation will come in and that we will be a little bit under this 3.9 number, but I'm supporting this amendment as presented.
Counselor Clucci, you look like you had your hand up.
Yeah, I probably did. So there was a little bit of a departure this year in our approach. A lot of times we'll start with the 3%. What do we need to get there? And that's it. Everybody's telling me what you can. We listen to the needs this year, I think, full out. And there's natural things that happen throughout the process, changes that come about just because we understand better as time passes. So I fully support this budget and this first recommendation. It's a good budget. You know, inflation's pretty high. We have a lot of things on the horizon that this positions us well for, where we're not going to have any surprises, I don't think, coming next year, because we didn't properly fund things this year. So I'm confident in that part.
Counselor Katarina?
I also will be supporting this particular budget for all of the reasons that the counselors who've spoken already have. I've sat in this position for, I don't know how many years, but this is probably one of the best budgets I've seen come in, the best rates right out of the gate, given the inflationary pressures that have gone on in society in the last couple of years. And given the fact that, we've really tightened our belt for a long time. And when you look at other municipalities and their mill rate, which I do every day in my business, we do darn well with our tax rate. So I look forward to Nick's valuation in August. I'm putting you right on the spot, Nick. I'm sure it won't be hard to do. But I will support this First Amendment. So, thank you.
Counselor McGee?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone involved. There's a ton of work from the finance committee, Tom, Norman. I mean, we all know how hard everyone, the schools, pulling together all of those interests, presenting them, compiling it, and then synthesizing it into something like this. So I do appreciate it. I just want to say that it's not lost to me how much work went into this. So I'll support the amendment at the recommendation of the finance committee. They're the ones with all of the nose to the grindstone, all of the dirty details. So I'm gonna have to put my faith in them that they really turned over a lot of rocks to get to where we are today.
Yeah, I just want to thank the finance committee as well for all the work they did. I too, like Counselor Slifer, watched all the meetings, and just Counselor Clucci, you just are such a phenomenal finance chair. I think Scarborough is very, very lucky to have you sitting in that seat. The questions you ask, the thoughtfulness you have about how to get to other things besides the mill rate, like fund balance, I truly appreciate, because this year for me, the budget, yes, we have a mill rate target that we like to hit, but to me, it's more thinking more about the future. And to me, the fund balance is the most critical aspect that this council, in my opinion, should be focused on when it comes to supporting the budget. And I think the choices you guys made to try and move some of the bonds to appropriations and all those things, I think are gonna position us for a better fiscal health in the long run. And so typically we get into this mindset every year on budget or on the mill rate and feel like the mill rate is a measure of success. And while I think it's part of the measurement, it's not the measurement, and some of the things that you mentioned in your setup, I think, to me, tells me that this is a very great budget, all things considered. Similar to, you know, what others have said, looking at other towns' mill rates, you know, you can Google it. I Googled it. And South Portland's at 4.2% for their mill rate. Cape Elizabeth is at 6.3, Biddeford 11.5, Portland 6.1, Gorham 19.5. And we're still coming in at 3.9 after going through the ringer, after making some good investments. Some things you guys were able to find room for, like the open space plan and the vulnerability assessment, which to me are very critical investments we need to be making that weren't proposed in the initial budget. They were acknowledged. And I think through the ingenuity of the committee, you guys were able to find ways to make that and still keep us at a relatively good number. You know, as close as 3%. To me, you know, one thing probably next year that I would advise for the council is to get a little bit more clarity around that, because, you know, at 3.97% to me is close to 3%. It's not a 10% budget. It's not what our other communities are seeing. So that to me is important to clarify so that we're all probably a little bit more on the same page, because I feel like this is meeting the intent of the goal, even if it's not exactly at 3%. And still at 3.9%, you know, Councilor Scyther, you mentioned cost of groceries. Well, inflation is at 4.93% right now. So still our impact to residents is below inflation in terms of what the impact of this budget is. And again, just looking at the numbers, a 3.9% mill rate increase compared to a 3% increase, what we're really talking about from a $400,000 home perspective is $60 annually, which is $5 a month. That's a donut and coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. I know because I get that all the time. And that's just once a month someone doing that. And I think to invest in the community services, to invest in the police department and the fire department and the schools the way they need it in a very modest way, I don't think this is asking for too much. Also, I think with, you know, there's different views too on the fact that we have this big school coming. The one thing I think that the committee did well, and I really appreciate, is again, trying to find ways to reduce our debt burden today to make room for that debt burden in the future that's coming with the school. So I think that's smart. I also think, you know, when we know that's coming, you know, some people may look at this as we need to tighten the belt today. And I look at it as knowing that's coming, now's the time to be making investments so that when that does come, it's less of a hit and we're not investing in the police department, not investing in other areas that need the investment because we're not investing right now when we have the room for it. And so to me, this is an appropriate approach. So that way we're kind of spreading the impact early, knowing that we have this relatively sizable impact that we need to manage coming down the road with the school. So again, for me, I think this is a very responsible budget. I think it's still pretty modest and conservative. Like we talk about growth and we talk about concerns about growth, and concerns about quality of life. We need to slow down. And I think a lot of it is because we have been so conservative and investing in ourselves. Where, you know, I can't forget when Tom proposed the budget, how he said, you know, we had a goal of 3% or 3% was the objective, but we spent below it. And it was, I think, $7.5 million that could have been invested in this community that counselors in the past have chosen to be super conservative and tighten that belt. Those could have been roadway fixes. It could have been investments in services that maybe are lacking that we know everybody's working really hard to meet, but like, I'm sure everybody would appreciate $7.5 million than not getting it. And so again, I think to me, budgets are about choices, and we've always chosen to be very, very limited. And I feel like this is the first budget, at least in my 3 years here, that I've seen we're actually hopefully moving forward and not just focusing on one aspect. So very pleased with the work, very pleased with all the work the staff and school have done to kind of get us here. And I think, you know, frankly, you know, this is great, but I feel like we should be investing more at the end of the day. But I think with all things that we need to consider, I'm very supportive of this budget. So with that, I'm going to call the vote on this. All those in favor? All right. Motion passes. So now back to the main motion as amended. Is there another amendment that would like to come forward?
Yes, so we did recommend to bring, as a finance committee, to bring forward the second amendment. I don't want to confuse that with the finance committee as recommending it. We recommended to bring this forward because we felt bound by the council's goal of as close to 3%. So this provides a pathway to get there. And what it would require is some cuts to budgets. Now, I understand nobody likes to feel like their budget's being cut, so it's uncomfortable. It's about 760,000 in total, as I recall. It's split pretty evenly according to your budget. We talked about a couple different methods of distributing that based on surplus or based on budget, and this is where we landed. This would get us to 3% or lower mill rate, as was the sort of the goal of the council. It wouldn't change the other goals as those are not affected by this amendment. So I don't have much more of a layup. It require everybody tightening their belt a little bit more than they've done already. And it would get us close to the 3%. With that, I'll offer it as a second motion.
All right, can I get a second? All right, any discussion? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, I think it's good discussion. I think I would reiterate that the conversations were full and frank, and I think along the way we made suggestions for areas in which folks might cut. And in terms of the original budgets that were presented, not actual year-on-year cuts. We're not talking about cutting budgets. We're talking about increasing the budget. It's a question about how much. I will say we're probably going into new territory when we say that it's a matter of semantics, whether or not 3.9% is closer to 3 or 4. But I think that there's a fairly clear answer to that. And what I would say is that I don't see this as an austerity budget, even with the additional motion. I think it still accomplishes a lot of the goals that we've set out to deliver. The one thing I will say, we spent a lot of time talking about setting our own goals. The number one goal was fiscal responsibility. The number one part of that was as close to 3% mill rate increase. So not hitting that is, for me, a miss. Ultimately, it's not what I say, it's what the majority of counselors say. But I think in the spot that we're in and the uncertainty about where we may be going in terms of the sort of investments we'll be needing to make in the future, that even tightening that belt a little bit more is actually will serve us all better in the end.
Counselor Scyther?
I appreciate the finance committee bringing this forward as a path to get us to maybe what's closer to a 3% mill rate increase. If for no other reason than if you're not on the finance committee, talking about $700 and something thousand and where that money would come from is kind of abstract. And so I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this is exactly where how this money would be distributed in terms of who would need to make what reductions to their existing budgets. And so for that, I appreciate the exercise and I just want to thank you guys for at least providing us and the public with a path to meet our goal.
Any other discussion? No? All right, all those in favor of the amendment? All right, all those opposed? All right, motion fails. All right, now back to the main motion as amended. Any discussion? No? All right, all those in favor? All those opposed? All right, motion passes 6-1. All right, next is order number 23-053. Second reading on the request to approve the expenditure an amount not to exceed $260,000 from the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund for the purpose of purchasing property located at 80 Beach Ridge Road, Southern Track, located more specifically identified by the Scarborough Tax Assessor's map R 030 lot 008B as recommended by the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and authorize the town manager to execute any and all documents as necessary to protect the town's interests. This was brought forward by the Parks and Conservation Land Board. And I think this has been on several meetings, so I don't know if we need to set it up. So I'm just going to see if there's anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Andrew Mackey. I'm the Executive Director of the Scarborough Land Trust. Our offices are at 7 Oak Hill Terrace, Scarborough. Thank you very much for considering this, especially considering this as the first property under your new resolution for 3030. I just wanted to kind of come up and give you a sense of what it takes to do this property in a very short time. I started meeting with the landowners in December of 2020 for this property. We still have, after today, 2 years to close on the property. That just gives you a time span of how long it takes to kind of move landowners that are interested in conservation to actually get to closing on a property and protecting it for the people of Scarborough. We still, after tonight, have $140,000 to raise on this property. We try to do that on every property. We have traditionally tried to get about half from the town land bond and half from other sources. Now, that said, we are very happy to work towards 3030. We realized 2 years ago that we needed to increase the pace of conservation in the town if we were going to connect things, protect wetlands, protect watersheds, protect wildlife, provide for public recreation that the public wants. So we have taken steps to do that. But with that comes a cost. Currently, we have 12 projects that we're working on. And we're fundraising for multiple projects at the same time. This is new for the land trust. Usually we'd work on one project, get it done, move on to the next project. But we feel we have a window in town to do as much conservation in the next couple of years before we lose that opportunity. So we're very happy to work with the town on this. We look forward to bringing more projects to you, hopefully very soon. And would love for the town to lean on us. We're here. We have a lot of expertise. We're very good at what we do. And we just thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, with that, can I get a motion?
Second.
Any discussion? No? All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next up is order number 23-058, first reading and refer to the planning board the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the Scarborough zoning ordinance relating to the requirements of LD 2003. So Autumn is going to set the stage for the public. If you tuned into our regular meeting, we did have a workshop on this where the town planner went through in more detail a lot of the requirements and changes that we're reviewing tonight. So I recommend anybody to watch that if they are tuning in late.
Thank you. As you mentioned, this is for LD 2003. This is 15 zoning ordinance changes that are a compilation to meet the requirements for this new law. This law was approved last July and it will go into effect July 1 of this year. It has to do with three areas in our ordinances as they relate to affordable housing and housing supply in Maine. So you have accessory dwelling units that are affected, density for affordable housing that is affected, and the ability to put more than one single family home on a lot. We have taken a very conservative approach with our ordinance amendments and created a path forward that has very minimal impact, I believe, while still meeting the intent of the law. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Are there any questions for Autumn? No. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? I'm seeing no one. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, I thought that Autumn did a great job in terms of bringing this along quickly, to try to hit a fast approaching deadline. I would like to know from a process standpoint, when we expect that some of the feedback that was given during the workshop will be incorporated into revised final ordinances.
It's like, I didn't capture any specific feedback, so I would say if there are any potential amendments that you would want to propose. that
Well, I
those-
could think of one was the question of the short-term rentals.
I think that's a separate council ordinance action that I believe the committee is
Okay.
planning to take up at some point, which I agree with you needs to happen sooner rather than later.
So that was one, but I thought there were a couple of others that we had asked about that might have resulted. I don't have a specific recommendation for that now, but I would, I'm assuming we have another cut at this when it comes back to us after the planning board provides its input,
Certainly.
but I will.
All right, any other question? Yeah.
Oh,
Or discussion, we're in discussion.
we're in discussion, right? Okay, yeah, no, holy cow. It's like you have to rewrite the whole ordinance.
Yeah.
And it's not, this is complex. I feel bad for towns that don't have somebody like you on staff trying to wrap their arms around this, what seemed like a simple change at the state level. So, good job. Thanks for bringing it forward.
Thank you.
I just want to state in terms of process, this is first reading. We intend, it does need to go to planning board. At this point, we will not have final adoption by July 1st. Yeah, if we do that going in, I think we're making a very deliberate and valiant effort to compliance. So I don't expect there's any negative repercussions so long as we're in the process.
I just also want to thank Autumn too, and the ordinance committee for working on this. This is complicated. And I also appreciate Autumn, not only did you take the time to make sure we were taking a conservative approach to address this and comply, but the cleanup you're doing with our zoning and using it as an opportunity for that, I think is super helpful. All the time I spend trying to look at zoning and now to know it's consolidated a little bit more will be just really great. Not only for the council, but for residents, developers, anybody looking into our zoning to see more consistency. So hopefully that's something we can continue to look at improving. And I know that's a passion that Councilor McGee has, is kind of look at our zoning a little bit more. So I'm assuming this is just the beginning of some more things.
It's a shared passion.
Yeah, shared passion between
Cleaning.
you two. Yeah. All right, any other comments or discussion? No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next up is order number 23-059. First reading and schedule a public hearing and second reading on the proposed new chapter 421, the Town of Scarborough Authorization of Outdoor Services Ordinance. And this is coming forward by the planning director.
Thank you. So this has come forward as several requests that have been brought to the fire department and the planning department for tents and events. And what has happened that I've garnered through going through, we had several users of these temporary outdoor tents that came up during COVID, during the pandemic. We had an emergency ordinance that began in May of 2020, and then it was extended 2 times and then it expired last May. And the intent and the discussions, of course, with those users were go through the site plan process. So this can be a permanent established use that you could have. That did not happen in several instances. And so with the summer season coming on, we received the request. So what is before you is an attempt to solve the issue for one more season. And then I've proposed some options that we could take to put it into a permanent solution. So this is a temporary seasonal authorization. This would be in effect if approved June 21st with a sunset clause of October of this year. And it's very similar to what you all have approved in the past with the requirements and the group that has to review these and the different specifications that the applicants would provide to our department. The options moving forward include doing this every year in May, and it's just a thing we do as a town. You could create an amendment to the zoning ordinance to create an outdoor services use and specific performance standards in your zoning district. That's another way to do it. You could also add temporary seasonal outdoor services to chapter 501, the tenting and camping seasonal chapter. We could add other seasonal things to that chapter, so that exists. And again, we could continue to encourage individual businesses to amend their site plans. So on an individual basis, they could comply. So there's some options, and certainly don't have to decide that right now, but this is what's created to permit those users this opportunity this season.
Great. Are there any questions for Autumn? I do have one question for you, Autumn. It looked like you were recommending that this goes through October 31st, which my immediate reaction was that seemed pretty far in the season. So I'm just curious why that specific date.
That date was brought up because more and more people are extending with warmer, I guess the warmer summer. And this was just at the advice of the group to get through all the holidays through the summer and fall.
Okay. Great. Anybody in the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion?
the only thing I would
Second.
say, John, just because you pointed out the date, is just to make sure that the council does feel like that is appropriate end date. Plenty of places have outdoor venues that they heat. And so do we anticipate that there is going to be anybody that's not in compliance who would like to use their patio beyond October 31st? And does it matter to us if we're going to approve the concept? Does that hard end date really matter?
Well, and this wouldn't necessarily to apply if you had a patio per se, but this would be something like if you just put up a tent in a grassy area, so it's a temporary thing.
Okay.
But the patio could continue if it's on your site plan. So these are more just
Trying to think of like physical places I go that have put up.
like Ken's or the clam shop,
Go Romeo's. with-
yeah, there's a few where you'll just, if they have extra space in the back and it's hot and it's a great place to sit outside,
Okay.
those types of places.
Okay.
Any other discussion? No, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-060, act on the request, review and accept the state required addendums to the Town of Scarborough Comprehensive Plan. This is being brought forward by the Long Range Planning Committee. I don't know, Tom, if you or Autumn or Karen would like to
Adam's got the podium.
set it up.
I'll introduce it. Thank you. So I was the beneficiary of a lot of work that went into the comp plan, right? And Karen Martin has been instrumental in getting it finalized. This group approved the comp plan June 30th of 2021, but it still was in the state acceptance process for quite some time. And so Karen has worked diligently to address all of those issues. We finally heard back from them in February, and we finally got acceptance from the state. And so we took this to the Long Range Planning Commission to make sure that we were doing the right things in the appropriate ways to add those addendums to our existing comp plan. So supplemental submission A is the table that reorganized the plan's policies to conform to the state checklist. We call this our implementation table. This was done last summer. And then supplemental submission B is a table that listed the additional requested items that we worked on this spring. And so those things are required to be part of the approved comprehensive plan and also a link to our CIP plan. So those three items are required for the state acceptance. Whenever you submit a comp plan to the state for review, they also send it out to other groups and they provide feedback and comment. Those things are not required to be addressed, but they are under consideration, and the state advises you to provide those. So what I've given you is the Long Range Planning Committee's recommendation. And they have recommended that you amend the comp plan to adopt submission A, submission B, and then add a link to the CIP. They've also recommended that we include the additional comments under additional review. In your packet is a mock-up of what the website would look like with those things. And so that is our intent. If you all move this forward, that we would update the website and provide those documents, and we would be finished with that part.
All right. Any questions for Autumn? No? Is there anybody in the public who'd like to comment on this item?
Hi, Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. I'm a member of the Long Range Planning Committee. And I request that you adopt what the Long Range Planning Committee recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
All right, any discussion? No? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, there were a couple of letters that were sent along with the submission that indicated areas that were deficient. So, and in fact, I think it was a timber harvest reference where the person responsible for that said he couldn't really support what was put in the comp plan. Is that something that we will make changes to subsequently, or was the feeling that we had done what was necessary, even though those, were a couple of areas where they said they just really didn't agree with what was recommended. So can you?
Sure, let me get to
speak
that
to that? And
specific
there's
letter.
one, and I'm not the, kind of nitpick here, but otherwise, I think it looked pretty good, and most of the other folks who reviewed it from a state level were positive, but I think there was one in particular related to timber harvest and also some things that we were doing related to managing some of the marine resources. I think this one was from.
From the Maine Forest Service
Yeah,
review,
yeah.
is that the one?
Yep. and
Right.
then-
And so I think that we felt that we had addressed our requirements for this one, and that I think you can also see there's a reference that we have a different option for shoreland and harvesting regulations.
Yep.
And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we also included some attachments to some forestry information in our additional standards for some information that we received from the state. And so I think that we have done what was required for us.
So one other area I'd just like to point out, so we don't lose sight of, it's a similar, actually, this individual was Miraglia, the senior planner from Addie Halligan, the watershed management person, but she referred to beaches, Maine Healthy Beaches program, and she suggested that that we take a similar approach, to managing our beaches. In other words, a more active approach. So I just want to make sure we don't lose track of that, specific recommendations like that might be buried deep in the bowels. of
Certainly. I
the
think
appendices.
things like that will definitely come up with the vulnerability assessment.
Yeah.
And so that'll be an opportunity for a lot of these conversations.
Great. Thank you. Otherwise, I would say this, this is tedious work. It's an understatement of the year. So, and the diligence that the long range planners have taken, on this and a chance to participate in some of it. And, it really is just dogged persistence, and they really, work without much admiration or adulation. So, we know you're doing good work and really appreciate all the extra efforts on those Fridays. I guess it's now, you've changed your day, right? So, but
Once
yeah,
a month.
once a month. So, but keep up the good work. Thank you.
Counselor McGee?
Yes, thank you. I'm just gonna kind of piggyback on the timber aspect of this, just because there's one paragraph in there that just struck me. It said, current use of taxation programs are one of Maine's most basic forms of encouraging conservation of agricultural, open space and forest lands. While clear the town is concerned about loss of open space to development and conversion to other uses, this tool set is almost completely ignored in its comprehensive planning process. So I guess I have a couple questions regarding that. What or how could we encourage that more? Or are we encouraging it more? And two, what would we need to do to encourage landowners to utilize that? And quite frankly, I don't even know what that would be. How does how does tax, I mean, how does that encourage? What's the incentive? Can somebody explain it to me?
And it may be more of a question for Nick, and he left. I know that we hold some lands in conservation and there's a tax benefit that you get, but then when it's transferred, I am not prepared to give you a good answer on this question.
Yeah, I think the comment is apparently the comprehensive plan doesn't specifically call that out as a potential strategy to assist in conservation. This is the tree growth. There are some significant financial incentives for putting land in tree growth. In exchange for that reduced tax rate or taxes paid, you're limited as to what you can do from a development point of view. Where we do accentuate that program, I think, and do it quite well, is through our website and through the assessings page. So though the comprehensive plan may not call that out as a specific strategy, I think we have other means of educating taxpayers that these programs are available to them.
I think it just caught my eyes, maybe being cited as another tool that I think I was just deaf to. I didn't understand that that was out there or even how it worked. So just maybe nice to have this visibility, if anything at all, the visibility that there's another option perhaps out there for either conservation or incentives for homeowners.
Yeah, this program is pretty well understood and known by large landowners, so I don't think it's a mystery. It's been around for decades and is well used, particularly for large landowners.
Any other discussions? No, I just want to thank Karen as well for getting this to the finish line. I think we were between planners when a lot of this work needed to move forward. So thank you, Karen, for getting this to closure. All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. So item 9, non-action items, we don't have any. I'm going to combine items 10 and 11, standing and special committee reports and liaison reports and council member comments. So are there any, Councilor Slifer?
Communications committee is supposed to meet on Thursday at 3 o'clock. But we are going to postpone our meeting. Our goal is to meet with the management person, project manager who oversaw our survey distribution from the last time we ran the community survey, and he was unavailable on Thursday. So right now it's TBD when we're going to be able to reschedule that, but just for the public's benefit, we are going to be moving Thursday's comms meeting to a different day coming soon.
Councilor Katerina?
Believe it or not, Rules and Policies is gonna have a meeting. What? Woo, can you believe it? On the 15th at 4, I think. It was 4 o'clock. We're just gonna talk about very quickly, term limits potentially on committees membership. That's it.
All right, any? Councilor McGee?
A tentative change to the ordinance. We will not be meeting tomorrow. We have penciled in, very darkly penciled in Tuesday afternoon. So stay tuned. We will make that announcement of the time and location shortly.
Okay, Councilor Shoup?
Yeah, so the Appointments and Negotiations Committee will be meeting next week, and I'm inviting anyone who wants to come because we will be having the executive session in regards to the Ad Hoc Community Center Committee. We do have applications. We don't have a substantial amount, but we do, I think, have enough to move forward, right, Liam? And
Quality, not fun.
it's true. And I will say, and I think that's very true. And I think we have what we need to move forward. So depending if we have a finance meeting, right now we're scheduled for 6:30. I think we might have a couple other small appointments to make quickly, but then basically we'll go into an executive session to look at those applications, and hopefully we will be able to make recommendations after coming out of the executive session. Would imagine.
Councilor Pucci?
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna say that I don't know if we're having a finance committee meeting. I'll catch up with Norm and Tom tomorrow. And we've met a lot over the past month and a half, so
Great.
if it's necessary, we will. If not, we'll spend the time discussing community center.
All right. Just on my end, again, there was a school building committee meeting this week. They're finalizing their site plan. They're also revisiting their cost estimates, and so those will be evolving. We met today, Tom and I, with the many members of the school committee to better understand their asks around infrastructure, utilities, stormwater, to make sure that we have those when we go into our June 12th working session with the Downs and the building committee, to make sure that we shore up some key things that are going to help us get the option agreement, or at least identify the key items that we need to kind of make sure we move forward for the option agreement. So I opened up the invitation for counselors to attend, and I've gotten some interest from a few with no specifics around topics or timing. So I'm probably just gonna send out times to each of you that have expressed interest, and just hopefully that works with your schedule. If it doesn't, let me know. Really, it's just giving an opportunity for more people to be involved in the process and see what's happening. No pressure to come prepared or anything. It's just to be a fly on the wall and learn. Again, Tom already gave the update on the appraiser and that moving forward. One thing that, again, is still a potential thing, and it's partially related to the school, but also the timing of the option agreement. We may need to have a August 2nd special meeting for the council, just to continue to advance things forward. I don't want to if we don't have to. I'm just putting that out as a warning that we may have to meet an additional time in August when we're only scheduled to meet once. So not confirmed, but just putting that on your guys' radar for planning purposes. Another item that I sent as a note to the council, while ordinance and the marijuana working group have been working very hard on enforcement actions and improvements to the marijuana ordinance, Councilor Himmel and I have taken some action to move forward on the land use aspect. So we started conversations with legal this week to better understand options that could be considered by the council in the future around removing marijuana cultivation only from the Pine Point overlay district. And so we had a good conversation. There are options, more to come. Legal's doing more analysis, and once we have more definitive recommendations, we'll socialize that with the council to see if there's support for making that land use change. And then the last item, at our next council meeting, we're going to be having a discussion on reflecting on our goals and just validating them and seeing what we want to tweak, change, adjust, focus on in the next half of the year. So we got the budget behind us. We'll hopefully have the GMO behind us. What other big boulders do we want to tackle? If you're not tired yet, there's still plenty of boulders that we can address. So, again, I want to make sure that, especially before the summertime, we're all kind of aligned on where we want to focus. Time really does fly between end of June through November. And so I just want to be realistic on what we think we can accomplish, knowing that really between now and then, we only have maybe 10 meetings, which isn't a lot. So really the intent is to hopefully kind of whittle down and get more focused over the next half of the council year. So come look at the goals, come prepared with ideas. I think tomorrow's session with the committees will be a good focus group almost for us to hear what they think, what they would like us to focus on based on what we have in our goals. And so interested to hear that feedback. So I hope many of you plan to come, and if not, we'll bring that forward as part of the conversation at our workshop on the 21st. All right, any other council comments or committee updates? No? All right, so with that, moving on to order number 23-061, act on the request for an executive session pursuant to Title I MRSA regarding a personnel matter relating to the town manager's employment agreement. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? All right, so we are going into executive session, and so we will not be returning, and we'll be adjourning from there. All right, thank you, everyone.